All right. Good morning and welcome to the California Cradle-to-Career Data Systems Data and Tools Advisory Board meeting. My name is Shannon Serrato and I'm the Director of Engagement here at Cradle-to-Career. Today's meeting is held in person at the Cradle-to-Career Data Systems office at 400 R Street in Sacramento. I want to welcome and thank the members of the public who have joined us both in person and virtually. Next slide, please. So I want to make a quick note about interpretation services. Today we have Spanish interpreters with us who will be helping us interpret the meeting. As a reminder for all members speaking today, we ask that you introduce yourselves. When you introduce yourselves, please say your name slowly as well as your job title or affiliation, and then pause briefly before proceeding with your comments. I will begin. Shannon Serrato, Director of Engagement at Cradle-to-Career. Thank you very much to Erin Vargas Rivas and Leticia Reina, who will be interpreting for us today. To listen to the comments given in Spanish, please select the globe icon at the bottom of the screen that says interpretation. Then select language interpretation and your Spanish or your language Spanish. You will then hear a live rendering of the comments in Spanish. I will pause for a moment for our interpreter Leticia to translate.
Muy buenos días, soy Leticia, su intérprete para el día de hoy, solamente para dejarles saber que si usted quiere escuchar los comentarios o las preguntas, la junta en español, seleccione el icono del globo en la parte inferior de la pantalla que dice interpretación o interpretation. Después seleccione language interpretation, que viene siendo el audio, interpretación del audio, y su idioma en el español, y así usted podrá escuchar la junta en directo con los comentarios o preguntas. Si tiene cualquier pregunta, usted puede mandar un aviso. Muchas gracias. Back to you, Shannon.
Thank you very much, Leticia, and thank you, Erin, for your help today. Next slide, please. As we begin today, we acknowledge this virtual meeting is taking place throughout the unceded territory of California, home to nearly 200 tribal nations. I am joining today from Sacramento, the traditional land of the Maidu, Miwok, and Nisenan people, whose presence, past, present, and future, we honor and respect. We will now pause for a moment to reflect. We recognize the ancestral land on which we are collectively gathered and our responsibility to support and foster learning through the dissemination of knowledge consistent with the Cradle-to-Career Data Systems work to advance equity. We hope this acknowledgement encourages individuals to think about what it means to occupy space on Indigenous lands, and we invite attendees to learn more about the ancestral lands on which they reside at native-land.ca. So before we dive into today's work, I want to take a look at what is in front of us. In total, there are 14 items on today's agenda. Our agenda, which is posted on the C2C website, specifically notes the agenda items that we will be accepting public comment on. Today, members of the Data and Tools Advisory Board will be voting on one agenda item, and we will open it up for member dialogue on 10 items. In total, there will be 4 opportunities for the public to engage with the advisory board. If you're a member of the public with us here in Sacramento and would like to make a comment, I request that you complete a speaker slip so I can call on you by name at the appropriate time and that the record of this meeting can be made full and complete. However, speaker slips are voluntary. Please give the speaker slips to Sofia Aguilar. Sophia, can you please identify yourself for the audience? Thank you. I will do my best to call upon everyone who has supplied a slip for an agenda item and recognize those who wish to make a last-minute comment. In addition, we may have members of the public who are joining us via Zoom. Please raise your hand to signal that you would like to make a comment. We will first take comments in Sacramento, and then we will open up to comments via Zoom. Although we traditionally allot 2 minutes per public comment, if we have 10 or more people who would like to comment on an agenda item, we will reduce speaking time to 1 minute to accommodate all speakers. We have a very full agenda today and plan to end today's meeting at around 3:30 p.m. We anticipate breaking for a 1-hour lunch around 12:05 p.m. and 2 5-minute breaks, one in the morning around 11:05 a.m. and one in the afternoon around 2:50 p.m. Before I call this meeting to order, I have a few reminders and updates. First, I ask that all members of the advisory board and the public silence their phones. We also ask that those in the room try to be as quiet as possible for accessibility purposes, as background noise can interfere with interpretation services. As a reminder for members of the public who have joined us here in Sacramento, copies of the meeting materials are available to you in the back left corner. Additionally, you may notice advisory board members accessing their laptops, phones, or other devices during the meeting. They are using their devices to access board meeting materials that are in an electronic format. I also ask when members of the advisory board offer a comment, they say their name before speaking. The camera angles can be tricky, and we would like this meeting to be as transparent as possible for those who are joining us virtually. I appreciate your assistance with this today. And lastly, today's meeting will be ran according to the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act as required by law. So I would like to call this meeting to order at 10:07 a.m. and ask that Stephanie Gutierrez Valdez please call the roll.
Member Borgen,
Present.
Member Catanzarite, Member Connor,
Present.
Member Faust, Member Harlick, Member Huff, Member Milen, Member Norris,
Present.
Member Ortiz Villar, Member Owen,
Present.
Member Fong, Member Reddy,
Present.
Member Reed, Member Shack,
Present.
Member Tarasoba,
Present.
Member Watson.
Present.
For the clarity of the record, we have 15 members present. We have a quorum.
Thank you, Stephanie. We will now move to agenda item 2, introduction of the Data and Tools Advisory Board Liaison from the Governing Board. At this time, I would like to invite Stephanie Gutierrez Valdez, C2C's Board Liaison and Governance Specialist, and Dr. Ana Luz Gonzalez Vasquez, Governing Board Member, to present this item.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Stephanie Gutierrez Valdez, and I'm the Board Liaison and Governance Specialist here at C2C. I'd like to refer members to the staff report that was drafted for this agenda item. If you're a member of the public and would like to follow along, the staff report can be accessed on the C2C website. Next slide, please. So a little context. At the November 2023 Governing Board meeting, the board voted to approve the creation and implementation of standing liaison roles for all aspects of C2C's work. So these roles established a reliable mechanism for collecting feedback and support, as well as contributing to a robust structure for collaboration. So back at the November 15, 2024 Governing Board meeting, C2C's Governing Board Chair Gavin Payne, appointed Governing Board Liaison appointments and stand-ins for the 2025 calendar year. So I'm excited to share that Governing Board member Dr. Ana Luz Gonzalez Vasquez has accepted her appointment as the first Governing Board Liaison to the Data and Tools Advisory Board. So a little insight into what her roles and responsibilities will include. Those will be attending the Data and Tools Advisory Board meetings and sharing insights from the Data and Tools Advisory Board with the Governing Board. So I'm excited to share that joining us today is Dr. Ana Luz Gonzalez Vasquez, and at this time, I'd like to ask her to share a brief introduction on herself.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. It's truly an honor to be here today. Again, my name is Ana Luz Gonzalez Vasquez, and I am a project coordinator for the Workforce Development Team at the UCLA Labor Center. And I've had the privilege of serving as a governing board member for the past year. So I just celebrated my first year anniversary, having been appointed by California Assembly Speaker Robert Rivas. And for those folks that are unfamiliar with the UCLA Labor Center, it's been a driving force for over 60 years, incubating projects that conduct research, provide education, and promote policy change to improve conditions for historically underserved workers, particularly women, people of color, immigrants, and those in low-wage industries. Throughout my career, I have co-led groundbreaking studies that have exposed wage theft and workplace violations among workers in low-wage industries across Los Angeles, New York, and Chicago. This research has been instrumental in shaping policies that better protect workers from systemic exploitation. At the UCLA Labor Center, I lead efforts to expand our workforce development area of work with a focus on building a high road economy, one that prioritizes equity, worker power, and shared prosperity. I approach research and evaluation as a continual learner, always recognizing the deep expertise within the organizations, programs, and communities I collaborate with. My work is really grounded in collaboration and humility, ensuring that those most impacted by policies Systems and programs are at the center of both the research design and the insights that emerge. I want to express my gratitude to Board Chair Payne for appointing me as a Data and Tools Advisory Board Liaison, and to Executive Director Marianne Bates and Board Liaison and Governance Specialist Stephanie Gutierrez Valdez for their continued support. Thank you so much for your time, and I'm really looking forward to working with you.
Great. Thank you so much, Stephanie, and a special thank you to Governing Board Liaison to the Data and Tools Advisory Board, Member Gonzalez Vasquez, for joining us today. We are grateful to have your insights and participation. For more information about our Data and Tools Advisory Board Liaison, including biography, term dates, and responsibilities, please visit the Cradle-to-Career website. Members can also find information about our additional Governing Board Liaisons on the C2C site. With a thank you to my colleague Angelique Palomar for updating the member page. Before we move on to our next agenda item, do members have any questions or comments? Okay, great. Moving on to agenda item 3, approval of the minutes from the October 1st, 2024 Data and Tools Advisory Board meeting. Okay, members have all had the opportunity to review the meeting minutes from October 1st, 2024 Data and Tools Advisory Board meeting. Would any members wish to make additions or corrections to the meeting minutes? Okay. Hearing none, may I have a motion to approve the October 1st, 2024 Data and Tools Advisory Board meeting minutes as submitted?
I move to Connor.
Thank you. May I have a second?
Member Borgen, second.
Okay. Before we vote, let's pause for public comment. If you want to comment on this agenda item, please note that comments should be limited to the October 1st, 2024 Data and Tools Advisory Board meeting minutes. Stephanie Gutierrez Valdez, can you please confirm how many people in person and on the line wish to comment via Zoom?
Starting in the room in Sacramento, is there anyone here that would like to comment? Seeing none, for members of the public attending via Zoom, please raise your hand at this time if you would like to comment on this agenda item. Note, if we have more than 10 folks who would like to comment, speaking time will be limited to 1 minute. Therefore, I ask all interested to raise their hands at this time to determine individual speaking time. At this time, I see no raised hands, and I will close public comment.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. And for clarity of the record, we can repeat the motion. Move to approve the Data and Tools Advisory Board meeting minutes from October 1st, 2024. Stephanie Gutierrez Valdez will now perform a roll call vote.
Okay, Member Borgen, Member Catanzarite, Member Connor,
Approve.
okay. Member Faust, Member Harlick, Member Huff, Member Milen, Member Norris, Member Ortiz-Villar, Member Owen,
Yes.
Member Fong, Member Reddy, Member Reed.
Yes.
Member Shack,
Yes.
Member Tarasova,
Aye.
Member Watson. For the clarity of the record, we have 15 ayes.
Thank you, Stephanie. The motion passes. Moving on to agenda item 4, update on the Office of Cradle-to-Career Data. Cradle-to-Career's Executive Director, Marianne Bates, will be presenting this agenda item.
Thank you so much, Shannon. This is Marianne Bates speaking. I'm the Executive Director here. It's great to see all of you. Today, I'd like to highlight some of the key parts of our work. Much of this I also highlighted at the February 28th Governing Board meeting, but I wanted to make sure to bring this to you here as well. So I'll begin by looking at Cradle-to-Career's purpose. This is from our education code. If we can just go back one slide, please. And so there is hereby established in state government the California Cradle-to-Career Data System for the purpose of connecting individuals and organizations to trusted information and resources. The data system shall be considered a source for actionable data and research on education, economic, and health outcomes for individuals, families, and communities, and provide for expanded access to tools and services that support the navigation of the education to employment pipeline. Having been in this role now for almost exactly 3 years, I still often go back to the education code and read through it to remind myself of what we're doing and why. And now more than ever, it's crucial that Cradle-to-Career serve as a source for trusted information, actionable data, and research. This moment highlights the wisdom of Cradle-to-Career's transparent governance structures, and our governing board makes decisions in public. You as advisory boards bring ideas and recommendations to the governing board in a public and transparent way. And I think that's really important for how the people's data are stewarded and used and made available. And this includes our commitment and mandate to make sure that we keep the data secure and individual privacy is protected. We're working diligently to monitor current developments, and we're committed to navigating any changes to ensure consistency in the build and the continuity of the Cradle-to-Career data system. Next update is about the Master Plan for Career Education. So as you may have seen, in December, the governor announced the unveiling of his Master Plan for Career Education at a press conference at Shasta College in Reading. I was honored to attend and join his conversation with education leaders in the North State who shared the details of their collaboration on Jobs First and K-16 collaboratives. That's the photo you see here on the slide. And on that day, he also released the executive summary, which is linked to here in the slide of that master plan. And the goals for this master plan are to prepare learners for the workforce by strengthening career pathways, prioritizing hands-on learning and real-life skills, and advancing access and affordability through streamlined collaboration and partnership. So feel free to see the executive summary that was released that day for more details. The governor's proposed budget includes a number of things related to this master plan. One is $100 million in Prop 98 funding for the California community colleges for credit for prior learning and a proposed career passport. And also $5 million for the Government Operations Agency to implement statewide planning and coordination. So a little more detail on the career passport. We at Cradle-to-Career are working collaboratively with the Community College Chancellor's Office and with the Labor and Workforce Development Agency to bring to life the governor's vision for a career passport. And the California Career Passport would be a customizable electronic record that people can use to share verified and validated academic and non-academic skills when they apply for a job. And this will involve a lot of collaboration. So the Chancellor's Office role is to build and manage the career passport, integrating with their existing e-transcript and mapping articulated pathways, or MAP, program as well. Cradle-to-Career's role is to inform the design and implementation plan by convening the relevant state partners and documenting models and national standards. Labor and Workforce Development Agency's role is to bring employers to the table and identify how skills can be mapped across academic and employment contexts. So we're really grateful for the cross-collaboration with our partners in developing a career passport to ensure Californians can demonstrate their skills when applying to jobs. The governor's master plan also calls for a new statewide planning and coordinating entity that would be housed under the Government Operations Agency. According to the governor's proposed budget and the executive summary of the master plan, the role of this entity is to bring together the state's education segments, workforce training providers, and employers to improve forecasting of needed skills and coordination of resources and initiatives across state government in alignment with recommendations from the master plan. I want to make it clear that the coordinating body would be separate from Cradle-to-Career. The role of Cradle-to-Career is to be a neutral source of trusted information, accessible to the public, including families, educators, researchers, and lawmakers. And the coordinating body may use information from Cradle-to-Career to inform their decisions on policy. Next slide. I'd like to take a moment to discuss our key priorities within the work plan for this year. Our first priority is the release of the Student Pathways Dashboard visuals with a focus on accurate and privacy-protected data. So our team has continued to put in long hours to ensure the Student Pathways data story will be released as soon as is feasible. We've made major progress since you last met in the fall. Our subject matter experts and data partners reviewed file extracts for the data that powers the dashboards, and all of our data partners have been very collaborative in this effort. They highlighted opportunities to clarify the data visualizations, and they problem solved with us on how to keep the visuals intuitive, even when implementing complicated data privacy protocols like the Cradle-to-Career data suppression policy. I'm deeply grateful for all of our data partners' collaboration on this, and the release of the dashboard will be a shared win for all of us. So really grateful for the commitment from our data providers on this. During the February governing board meeting, my colleague Ryan Estriato provided a presentation that walked us through some examples of how we've problem solved specific instances, remaining true to our commitment to data privacy and also the ability to disaggregate the data by geography and by demographics. So I really encourage you all to take a look at that presentation. It was incredibly informative. A significant effort over the past months has also focused on the security of the data. In the past, Dan Lamery has provided presentations and walked through how we develop and update our system security plan in collaboration with our data partners. And the security work is really extensive. So in addition to the overall plan, we also need to routinely conduct security testing and vulnerability management. And findings may include something as seemingly trivial as a small WordPress engine plugin that leverages a JavaScript library having a known vulnerability. So Cradle-to-Career has to be vigilant to ensure reported vulnerabilities are dealt with swiftly. Our system integrator contractor has created the visualizations for the Student Pathways data story and powered by the data in the data system. And our office is currently working on the final security and data privacy reviews, as well as the final reviews of the usability of the visualizations when embedded in a website page. So we're collaborating with our partners on finalizing a public release date, and we're fully committed to the release of the dashboard. Now I want to take a step back and remind us how groundbreaking it was for Cradle-to-Career to commit to working first on data tools for the public, for students, for families. Nearly all other state longitudinal data systems were set up first primarily for data insights within government. So legislative staff requests, data sharing across agencies with each other. And Cradle-to-Career's decision to create public dashboards first is different. And the stakes of the data linkages and privacy protections are higher when we start with a public data tool instead of internal data usages for government's own data analysis. So this commitment to public engagement and input required us to set up the human infrastructure first, which includes the governing board, you as advisory boards, and our team here within the office, before setting up some of the most difficult parts of the data infrastructure. But I think that was the right choice, right? It's all laid out in the statute that I review periodically, as I said, because if that human infrastructure is not set up first, we would lose opportunities to have public trust, engagement, and buy-in in the work. So in addition to the Student Pathways dashboard visuals, this year we will also focus on developing the research request process and our secure data enclave. Our general counsel, Julia Blair, has already started outreach and discussion with her legal counterparts for data providers. And in February, Ryan Estriato presented to the governing board about the work ahead to build a secure data enclave and launch the research request process. It will be a major lift. across technology, infrastructure, program decisions, and collaboration with our partners and legal frameworks. So the purpose of Ryan's presentation was to help us all remember the agreements from the planning process back in 2019 and 2020 in the context of the overarching legal agreements that we've signed with our data partners and our statutory charge. So please feel free to go to the February 28th board meeting materials and video for more information on that. We also have other work on deck, which includes working on more flat files with aggregated data for researchers that we'll make available and focusing on new dashboard development. We also have a wealth of data that we plan to ingest, including new data points from the Department of Developmental Services, from CalKids, which was just approved at the February 28th board meeting, new workforce data, and new teacher data. So I want to reiterate that we can deliver on our work plan, 5-year timeline, and new work only with the resources mapped out and the budget change proposal that we mapped out and presented to the governing board last summer. All right, I want to highlight and acknowledge the important and difficult work that we've done with our partners collaboratively to make this data system come to life. And in December, I had shared an early wins document that gives an overview of the historic work we've accomplished together. And there's a link to it in the slide deck, and this is available on our website. And this document highlights the breaking down of silos to come together in order to shed light on Californians' journeys. We've added Department of Developmental Services as a data partner to ensure those with developmental disabilities have their stories included in the data system. We've championed the scaling of CCGI, CaliforniaColleges.edu, in accordance with our statute, and now over 2 million students have access to specialized college and career planning, making it easier for students to apply to the CSU and UC and the community colleges. And overall, we've focused on removing administrative burdens for students. We've done all of this with collaboration at the center. Our engagement and data programs teams have conducted extensive user design work to ensure accessible use of our data tools by the public. And additionally, we have a data governance structure that enables all data providers to come to the table together with the public and lawmakers. So we're really excited about what's to come. I also want to highlight a resource, and I realize this is too small to read. This is just helping you understand when you find the link that you found the thing. So this is a checklist, and this is a resource you can use to tell the story of what it takes to create a dashboard. So the next time someone asks you whether artificial intelligence will be able to create C2C dashboard visuals with a click of a button, this checklist can help you answer that question because it summarizes just some of the steps this work takes across data governance and legal agreements, data infrastructure and security, engagement and public input, and then the actual development of the public analytical tools from the underlying data. So I'm really grateful for all of our data partners' collaboration on this. And as I mentioned, there's just one box at the end there, the left unchecked, which is the official launch of the data story, and that will be a shared win for all of us. CalKids update. So as I mentioned in February, the governing board took action on adding the Scholarshare Investment Board as a new data partner. And that board administers CalKids, which is the Savings Accounts for Students program. And I want to highlight this quote from governing board member Catalina Cifuentes that highlights how Riverside County has focused on using linked data to increase CalKids take-up. I also want to uplift that among the recommendation ideas that the Data and Tools Advisory Board considered, Member Fong had recommended linking CalKids data. So wanted to highlight that as well. We also had a presentation at our governing board meeting from our team and the Labor and Workforce Development Agency about potential new workforce data. This would represent a major expansion of the data system. As you know, we're currently running a task force on that, which I'll talk more about in a moment. I also wanted to give you the context. In the context of potential new data points, I wanted to mention that Senator Laird has introduced Senate Bill 575 this year, a bill that would clear a statutory path for limited data sharing between the Franchise Tax Board and Cradle-to-Career. If passed, this bill would allow the C2C governing board to request limited earnings information from FTB, enhancing the data system's understanding of income and tax credit uptake in California. I mentioned the task force we have ongoing. Last fall, you all heard about the convening of C2C's workforce task force that would be focused on data elements. And to kick off that process, Secretary Knox from the Labor and Workforce Development Agency sent us a memo about potential research questions and data elements related to the workforce. So the task force is about halfway through its meetings. On April 3rd, we plan to have a community conversation that's open to the public, focused on the outcomes of that task force. So you can watch the Workforce Task Force meetings from our website. And you also heard a broad update on the potential new data during the February governing board meeting from our team and from LWDA about potential new workforce data. As I mentioned, this would represent a major expansion to the data system. And I want to give a big thank you to members Lisa Catanzarite and John Watson from this body here who are participating and sharing their expertise in that task force as well. So many thanks. I also wanted to give a special thanks to Abby Snay from Labor and Workforce Development Agency and her colleagues for working really collaboratively with Cradle-to-Career to identify potential data elements to share with us. An update on the California College Guidance Initiative. They continue to scale statewide. This slide illustrates their reach as of last summer, and you can see the point. Where the state's investment as part of the Cradle-to-Career effort kicked in with providing this tool free of charge to school districts. And their growth continues just since late last fall. When CCGI reported out to the governing board, they've brought in more than 50 additional local educational agencies into partnership. They also, sorry if we can go back for just a second, they've also been really on the ground throughout the state, training more than 8,000 educators in the last calendar year, including at 57 in-person events across the state. And that happened in really close collaboration with CSU, with UC, and with CSAC, meeting guidance counselors and educators where they are to ensure that this tool that's being scaled is used in practice and really reaches as many students as possible. So it's really wonderful news. Next slide, please. And CCGI has also recently announced a leadership transition, so we're excited to continue working with Mary Aguayo, CCGI's new Chief Executive Officer, and she will serve alongside Tessa Carmen DeRoy, who will transition out of her role at the end of 2025. So we're really grateful to Tess for her leadership and partnership, and we're really excited about what's ahead with Mary's vision. I wanted to highlight a few new team members. So we recently welcomed Sushil Singh to our team. He's an accomplished data engineering and architecture leader and brings over 2 decades of progressive IT experience working with leading Fortune 500 companies. So we're really excited to have him on board. We also recently posted a cloud engineer position and will soon post a research data specialist 2 position. And I'm so grateful for all of your efforts to amplify these job postings when we post them. It really makes a difference in ensuring that as wide a possible pool of applicants learn about our job postings and can help continue to ensure that we have a really strong team doing the work here. So thank you for that. And I just want to end by thanking all of you for your partnership, especially over the last year. We're going to be talking about and working through a revised process for how you make recommendations to the governing board. And I just want to acknowledge that as with any new process, there have been wrinkles and there may have been some frustrations with the process, I imagine. And I just really appreciate the spirit in which you've worked with us and helped us learn together with you and the ideas that you've shared with us and with the governing board. So as a result, the governing board acted in February to revise the process and create a new process through which your ideas and recommendations flowed to the governing board. I flagged all of this for you via email in January when that process was still ongoing, and you'll hear more about it later today from Ryan Estrellado and from Stephanie Gutierrez Valdez as well. So we're really optimistic about this new process. I think it will provide for a more flexible way for your ideas to be considered, and for them to also continue to inform the governing board's processes throughout the year, as opposed to only in one moment in time. So I'm optimistic about that and really appreciate all of your ideas and partnership and input along the way. So that concludes my update.
Thank you, Marianne. We will now open it up for member questions or comments, but before we begin, I would like to ask members to please ensure that you're using your microphone to make sure that folks joining us virtually can hear everybody's comments and questions. So, any comments or questions from you all? Member Shack?
Member Shack speaking. This is slightly unrelated to the topics you covered, but I wanted to cover this question. So a number of local and state agencies are concerned about budget cuts from federal government. And so my question is, are there any specific sources of funding from the federal government that's funding the activities of Cradle-to-Career? And more broadly, do you expect any impacts on like staff capacity or anything that could impact the work that that we look at?
Thank you for that question. This is Marianne. Cradle-to-Career's entire budget for our office, for the work we do with contractors, for our operational costs comes from the state of California's general fund. So we do not receive any federal grants or any federal funding for our work. So the first and most direct answer to your question is no. There are no federal cuts that have directly affected our work. I think the longer answer to your question is that, as you know, the Cradle-to-Career data system does not collect data directly. We work with our partners. They're all state of California partners. And so at this time, we continue to receive, as you know, March is our annual data import. Our data providers are providing their annual data to us this March. The work continues. And a large share of the data in our data system is education-related data. And so I think over time, broad shifts that happen at a national level or that happen in Cradle-to-Career may have implications for our work. But the direct answer to your question is that our entire budget comes from the state of California's general fund. And so we provided, I think the final context I'll just provide is I would refer you to the update that Leslie Taylor provided to the governing board in November. As you know, the state of California's budget fluctuates. All departments and agencies were asked to reduce their budgets and to take cuts, and there were some vacant position sweeps. So Leslie provided an update on that in November. We had 27 approved positions, and now that's down to 26. But overall, I would say I'm quite grateful for our ability to continue to do the work and to have a strong staff team who is here and ready to continue. So thank you for that question.
Member Borgen, thank you for all the work and the great progress we've seen. The check marks are amazing to see all those check marks and visualizations, and just that one last one to progress to is amazing. So nice work by staff. Regarding CCGI and the number of students and the exponential growth, is there any data around where the LEAs are that partnered or not partnered, specifically geographically?
Yes, I believe, the team, correct me if I'm wrong, that CCGI has that information on their website for the high schools and the local education agencies that they currently partner with. So that should be available on the CCGI website page. Thank you for that.
Member Fong, I have two questions. One, I just am so excited about this California Career Passport and what it will provide for students and for employers. One is, are private institutions signing up to participate in this career passport kind of program? And the second thing is around the employers who are being brought to the table to talk about the skills. Is there a list of employers that we can review to see if they're really representative, all the various industries that we have in California?
Sure. So the first thing I would mention is that it's proposed and was proposed in the governor's budget. And so this is at the very early stages. When you said private institutions, I'm assuming you mean universities, colleges. Okay. So at this time, this is a tool that is being built by the California Community Colleges Chancellor's Office. And if you go back to the recommendations that came out of the e-transcript task force last spring and summer, there were a number of recommendations around a career passport specifically. And the idea, both in how the chancellor's office right now is revamping e-transcript itself and how they're approaching the career passport, is that it's being built at the community colleges by the community colleges, but with a hope for universal design, and that it can be used by the other higher education segments and by other higher education entities and broadly. Those are the kind of the concepts for it, but it's being built first by the community colleges. So I would point you to some of the recommendations from the e-transcript task force last summer, which provides some of the input that body provided as an input into the master plan. I also think that as the work progresses, we'll have more detailed information from the chancellor's office on exactly how this is being built. Similarly, for the question on employers, that's work that Labor and Workforce Development Agency is doing in partnership with the community colleges. And so I would expect that more detailed information on which employers they will be bringing to the table in the future will come out. So it's very early stages, but great question.
Any other questions or comments from members? All right.
I'm so sorry, y'all. One, I am very excited that you all are putting all the necessary measures for data security and the protocols around that. I wanted to try, I don't know, this might be crazy, but have y'all thought about bringing in hackers to think about hacking the system before it's fully released? Just because, it happened.
Yeah. So all I'll speak to that is that we do have a formal security policies task force that includes the chief information officers of our data providers, our own staff who specialize in this, and the Department of Technology and others. And the processes that we use and the policies we put in place include extensive testing. And I'll just leave it at that.
Okay. In the interest of time, we will move on unless anybody has a pressing question. Okay. Moving on to agenda item 5, update on the advisory board recommendation process and changes to the governance manual. I would like to invite Ryan Estriado, Director of Data Programs, and Stephanie Gutierrez Valdez, Board Liaison and Governance Specialist, to present this agenda item.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Stephanie Gutierrez Valdez. As Shannon Serrato mentioned, joining me today is Ryan Estriado, Director of Data Programs. For this agenda item, I'd like to refer members to the staff report that was created for this particular agenda item. Again, if you're a member of the public and would like to follow along, the staff report can be accessed on the C2C website. So, the governance manual states that it will be a living document, which is to be amended by the governing board over time to reflect the evolution of the Cradle-to-Career data system. Changes to the manual will be considered by the Governance Manual Review Committee at least once per year. Today, I will be providing a brief summary from the Governance Manual Review Committee meetings and the February 28th Governing Board meeting. I will then transition over to highlight pertinent changes to the governance manual that will directly impact you as Data and Tools Advisory Board members, in particular those being the Advisory Board recommendation process. I will then hand it over to Ryan Estriado to provide a high-level overview of how the approved changes to the Advisory Board recommendation process will impact today's meeting. Next slide, please. At the November 15, 2024 Governing Board meeting, the Governing Board designated 5 Governing Board members, including the Board Chair and Vice Chair in particular, to serve as the Committee Chair on the Governance Manual Review Committee. So in accordance with the committee charter, the responsibilities of that committee entailed carefully reviewing and providing edits to the governance manual. Specifically, the committee charter identified 4 key areas of focus. First, revisit chair and chair elections process and terms. Second, clarify procedures related to per diem for committees and subcommittees, as well as representation of advisory board members. Third, consider changes to the advisory board recommendation process. And fourth, provide stylistic changes or technical additions and/or corrections. So as specified in the committee charter, the committee met twice, first on December 6, 2024, and then on January 30th, 2025. So the committee's first meeting focused on reviewing and discussing the suggested changes provided by the office. So to aid in committee member deliberation, proposed changes were broken down into 3 categorical sections. So the first one being grammatical or stylistic changes, second bucket being technical additions, clarifications, or corrections, and then finally potential changes for member discussion. So again, the first meeting concluded with the committee appointing our committee chair, vice chair of the governing board, Robert Tagorda, and governing board member Soublé as the committee liaisons. And their responsibilities were to work offline in tandem with the office to provide draft language edits on particular sections discussed during member deliberation. So advisory board members may recall receiving an email from Executive Director Bates outlining the proposed changes to the advisory board recommendation process back on January 17th, 2025. And advisory board members were invited to provide public comment as deemed appropriate. So the committee then reconvened on January 30th to review and finalize the draft language, which was brought forward to the governing board at the February 28th governing board meeting. Next slide, please. So now at the February 28, 2025 governing board meeting, the governing board approved 10 edits in total, which were broken down again into those 3 sections: stylistic changes, technical additions, clarifications or corrections, and substantive changes. This slide here outlines the breakdown of those particular changes. So I'd like to draw members' attention to those 4 substantive changes approved by the governing board. So again, those changes were specific to succession planning, per diem for committees and subcommittees, representation of advisory board members, and the advisory board recommendation process. I'd now like to take this opportunity to unpack some of these substantive changes for members. So the intent in doing so is to ensure that all members have a clear understanding of the revisions as it directly relates and affects to all members as advisory board members. Next slide, please. So first highlight is related to per diem for committees and subcommittees. So while statute allows governing board members to receive per diem and reimbursement of travel expenses, the language in statute does not address whether this provision also applies to our advisory board members. However, in order to remain equitable between our 2 respective boards, so the governing boards and our 2 advisory board members, language was added to clarify that notwithstanding any statutory prohibitions on per diem and travel reimbursement, as well as being contingent upon a budget availability, advisory board members may continue to request per diem compensation for attending the annually scheduled full board meetings. However, just to clarify that per diem is not provided for the attendance and participation of committees, subcommittees, or brief virtual meetings. Second section is related to the representation of advisory board members. So we understand that advisory board members may change employment, may retire. However, in order to ensure clarification, language was added to directly specify that you all as advisory board members are appointed to your seat as individuals based on your pertinent experiences, expertise, and perspectives, and you do not necessarily represent the organization that employs you. However, I do want to be clear here in that an exception does apply if an advisory board member or an applicant is employed by an entity with representation on the governing board. Specifically, I would like to call out a revision clarified under technical additions, clarifications, or corrections that specifies that in order to maintain the goal of ensuring a diverse advisory board that reflects a broad range of perspectives and experiences, language was added to the selection for advisory boards committee procedures to specify that among the caveat of factors and considerations the governing board and the selection for advisory boards committee make in considering appointments to those advisory board vacancies as they arise, we want to ensure that no particular single organization or even type of organization is disproportionately represented. So later today, members will have an opportunity to learn more about the advisory board recommendation process. Next slide. Okay, so members will note in front of them, you guys have the printed graphic displayed on the slide. So before I provide a breakdown of the cadence and order of this graphic, I just want to provide some context and background in terms of the advisory board recommendation process. So statute establishes 2 advisory boards to provide input and feedback to the governing board, and then both with distinct scope and authority. Per statute, a primary role of advisory board members is to listen and to work with the public to understand their needs and be able to communicate these needs effectively to your fellow advisory board members, the office, and governing board members. So in establishing the governance manual, the governing board outlined the authority of the 2 advisory boards, but it also defined the scope of recommendations they may provide and established the process by which advisory board members may submit these proposed recommendations to the governing board for the governing board to potentially act on said recommendations. So given the relatively recent establishment of C2C, the 2024 Advisory Board recommendation process marked the 2nd year that advisory board members had an opportunity to participate in that process. So the former recommendation process allowed for advisory board members to form a subcommittee during the summer advisory board meeting, and that subcommittee would be responsible to, 1, meet over the summer to publicly discuss and ideate the submitted proposals, and to draft a report that specifically outlines the prioritization from that subcommittee regarding the proposals submitted. So the report was then shared with your fellow advisory board members to serve as a resource for completing the pre-meeting survey prior to the fall meeting. So at least 1 month prior to the fall meeting, advisory board members completed that pre-meeting survey, which rank ordered the proposals and established the top 3 proposals that were then prioritized and discussed at the fall advisory board meeting. At the fall advisory board meeting, members had an opportunity to receive a presentation from the individual who submitted that proposal. And then following deliberation, the advisory board members had an opportunity to vote on whether to advance each individual proposal, including any proposed amendments, to the office for a feasibility study. So overall, the 2024 recommendation process functioned as was previously outlined in the governance manual. However, it's worth highlighting that over the past 2 rounds of recommendations, the office observed that the recommendation process was particularly challenging to navigate both for advisory board members and our C2C staff. In particular, the office heard from some advisory board members that they felt limited in prioritizing up to only 3 recommendations a year, and this limited opportunities for advisory board members to present their ideas to each other. Modify or combine ideas where relevant, and then edit or strengthen multiple proposals in response to feasibility considerations shared by the office. In addition, some advisory board members raised some procedural questions and concerns. So overall, the former process did not really allow for as much collaboration and interaction in public meetings as may be typical in other advisory bodies, and was administratively burdensome for both the office and advisory board members. So considering these myriad of factors, our governing board chair Payne requested that the Governance Manual Review Committee reassess the most effective approach to refining and enhancing the advisory board recommendation process. So that brings us to this new graphic here. So after much deliberation between various choice points on how to best refine and enhance the advisory board recommendation process, the committee came to a consensus on changes to better enhance that advisory board recommendation process. So I'm now going to voice over how the process will work overall, and then providing a big picture of said process. So as members will notice from the graphic, the advisory board recommendation process begins in the spring. So when the office shares the proposal form and rubric with the advisory board members and the public. So then later today during agenda item 11, we're going to review this particular section in more detail. The next section or stage of the process is open to the public and community engagement advisory board members who can submit a data and tools proposal form to the office, which will be posted on the C2C website. Leading up to the Summer Advisory Board meeting, which is traditionally held as a joint advisory board meeting with both the Data and Tools and the Community Engagement Advisory Board, members will have an opportunity to publicly discuss the ideation of recommendations received from the public. Members will also have an opportunity during the summer meeting to learn more about available data points and ask questions from the data providers. Next. Data and Tools Advisory Board members will have an opportunity to submit their proposal forms at least 6 weeks before the fall meeting. So for members, your options may be to choose to submit your own proposal form. You may submit a joint proposal form with up to 5 Data and Tools Advisory Board members. You may sponsor a proposal form that a member of the public submitted, or choose to further refine concepts from ideas submitted by the public or proposed in prior years. So the office will ensure that all proposals are posted and submitted to the C2C website 2 weeks prior to that fall meeting. Moving on, now we're at the fall meeting. During the fall meeting, each member or team of members will have an opportunity to present their proposals. Just want to provide specific clarification that presentation time of those proposals will be divided based on the amount of proposals submitted, and this just ensures that the board has an opportunity to hear about all the proposals and have adequate time to discuss those. During member discussion, members will focus on how different proposals may complement or contrast each other. They may voice their opinions on which proposals they find most promising for C2C's ability to provide actionable information to the people of California. In addition, the governing board's liaison to the Data and Tools Advisory Board, so our governing board member, Ana Luz Gonzalez Vasquez, will be in attendance at the fall meeting to learn from the discussions. Afterwards, 2 members of the Data and Tools Advisory Board will be asked to volunteer to work with the governing board liaison to the Data and Tools Advisory Board to work offline to draft a report. So a few key things will happen between the fall and spring meeting. So first, the office is going to work with the authors of those proposals to conduct a light touch feasibility study of those proposals. Proposal authors may choose to update or clarify their ideas in response to those feasibility studies. In addition, our 2 Data and Tools Advisory Board volunteers will work with the governing board liaison to draft a report that includes 3 key sections. So first of all, that report should link to all proposals members submitted. Second, it will include the office's light touch feasibility analysis. And third, it's going to have a dedicated section for advisory board members to summarize the discussions at that fall meeting. So at the spring meeting, members will have an opportunity to discuss that draft report and share any comments or reflections on the report. This report may be updated just based on the discussions of that spring meeting if desired, and will be shared and presented at the governing board's May meeting and may be used to inform the governing board's work and deliberation. So again, later this afternoon, we will revisit this process, and I'll provide members with particular attention to key dates and timeframes, as well as specific focus on member responsibilities related to the upcoming 2025 Advisory Board proposal process. So at this time, I would like to hand it over to Ryan Estrellado to walk members through what these changes to the Advisory Board recommendation process mean for today's meeting and the recommendation process overall. Thank you, Ryan.
Thanks, Stephanie. Good morning, everybody. My name is Ryan Estrellado. I'm the Director of Data Programs. It's nice to see everybody again. Stephanie just reviewed changes to the governance manual and procedures, and I'll now go through how these changes affect what we'll be doing today and how they'll affect the proposal process over the coming weeks and months. To understand how these changes affect our process this year, I'd like to first recap what we did together in October of 2024 during our Data and Tools Advisory Board meeting. During that meeting, we were using the previous proposal process, so not the one that we're in now, the one before. And during that meeting, members voted to advance 3 of the 6 proposals for feasibility studies. Those 3 proposals were weaving disaggregated multilingual learner data was number 1. Second was digital access to learning. And then the third proposal voted to advance the feasibility study was student debt at colleges and universities. Later on in agenda item 10, we'll go into the in-depth feasibility studies that the office conducted on these three proposals. Next slide, please. I want to now summarize, now that we've recapped, I want to summarize the changes in the proposal process that Stephanie talked about earlier. At a high level, those changes boil down to what's here on the slide, and I'll list a few. First, instead of voting on up to 3 proposals for studies, there will be no vote. And instead of doing in-depth studies on up to 3 proposals, the office will do light touch feasibility studies on all the proposals. That's a big change. In-depth studies on 3 feasibility studies, 3 proposals, previous process, now light touch feasibility studies on all of the proposals. In March, instead of the advisory board voting on which proposals go to the governing board, there will be no vote. And in the new process, all proposals will go to the governing board, and the advisory board will be responsible for summarizing their advice about the proposals at the May governing board meeting. And then finally, where before the governing board would vote to take action on proposals, now in the new process, the governing board may instead take a range of actions in response to the proposals, with the option to vote and take action being one of those possibilities. Next slide, please. Okay, so that's a summary of what we did in October when we last saw each other in the fall, and also a summary about what's different in this new process, which I want to emphasize, we hope focuses on creating more opportunities for discussion and advisory on all of the proposals instead of just 3. That's really the intent here. Later in agenda item 10, we'll get into this a lot more. We will review the 3 in-depth feasibility studies. So recall, we were in the previous process when we did this. So we do have 3 in-depth informative feasibility studies. We will also summarize what we are calling light touch feasibility results on the remaining proposals. And then we'll have a discussion, and from that discussion, we will decide together on key points that you would all like to be included at the presentation to the governing board in May. That concludes this agenda item, and with that, I'd like to hand it back to Shannon.
Thank you for that informative presentation, Ryan and Stephanie. Before we move on to the next item on our agenda, I would like to open the floor to any member questions, comments, or thoughts. Member Norris.
Member Norris speaking. In the new process, I know that the the governing board liaison attends the fall meeting, but there's further discussion at the spring meeting. It doesn't explicitly state that the liaison will attend that meeting also. Is the intent for the liaison to attend that meeting?
Yes, you are correct in your assessment, Member Norris. So one of the key responsibilities of the governing board liaison to the respective advisory boards is to attend all meetings and just listen in on member discussions.
Member Catanzarite, first I just want to thank the staff and the governing board for making these changes so that we can consider more than the 3 proposals. This is a nice advance to be able to add more data to the data system, so appreciate that. And then I had a question. Ryan, you mentioned that the governing board could take one of several actions. Could you describe what those alternative actions might be other than advancing a proposal?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Happy to. There aren't predefined sets of things that the governing board can do. The spirit of that change is that they are not required to give a yes/no vote on each of the what in the previous process was proposals that had in-depth feasibility studies. That is still possible for them to do. but they're not required to do that. And so one thing that I can imagine, just to help illustrate that, is the governing board can instead choose to discuss the proposals further, or use the information given to them from the light touch feasibility studies to inform how they direct the priorities of the office. And that could include a specific vote to take action on it at that time or in the future, or it could be left at discussion for that meeting with more to come later. In summary, I think the easiest way to think about that is that they have a whole range of options to be able to respond to the light touch feasibility studies as compared to before, where really the main option was to vote on each of the proposals.
This is Marianne. I'd like to add one more reflection from my end on how this fits within the calendar of what the governing board does throughout the year. So I think one challenge in the prior process is that the governing board was sort of put in the position of saying yes or no outside of the context of our work plans for the year and the budget requests that the governing board does. Because your report goes to the governing board in May, they typically take action in the August meeting each year on our proposed work plan and any potential budget requests, if any, that they want to advance. And so the hope is that this process allows them to have the ideas that you bring forward inform their work throughout the year, and also specifically in the context of the work that we're doing as an office, especially anything that would require new resources or staff time, or essentially making a prioritization decision and saying, if we ask the office to do something new, what needs to be removed from the list so that they have space for that. So it's trying to bring all of that together so that they're making decisions in context.
Board Member Ortiz Villar. So one question that I have is, I see in the pre-meeting between spring and summer, we're saying the public submits proposals, and then in the summer, we may discuss those proposals, and then there's advisory boards submitting proposals in that next in-between time. Are those proposals intended to be like attaching ourselves to the public forms that were submitted? Is it complete new ones? Just wondering like what the intention is of having these like 2 points of submission from the public versus the board.
Yes, so later today in agenda item 11, we'll talk more specifically about like the particular timing in relation to the 2025 advisory board recommendation process. But high level, the reason that the public proposal submission period is before the submission period for the advisory board members is it allows more opportunity for the advisory board members to kind of consider these proposals and can in tandem with the discussions elevated in the summer meeting. So an individual from the public may submit a proposal, and then just in discussion at the summer meeting, you may, as an advisory board member, decide I could potentially enhance it in this particular way. And should you choose to sponsor that proposal and bring it forward to the fall meeting, you in essence would basically be submitting the proposal utilizing your name, and you may choose to work that with that member of the public to kind of refine it and work to ensure your presentation at the fall meeting is in alignment with the spirit of that proposal.
This is Marianne. I'm also happy to add a little historical context. So prior to last year, if members of the public wanted to make sure that that you hear their ideas, the process was a little bit unclear. Like, okay, do I come and give public comment? Do I reach out to individual advisory board members? What do I do? And so this is just providing a clear and transparent way for members of the public to say, hey, advisory board, here's an idea I've got. And then it's really up to you, right? Whether you come up with your own idea or whether you sponsor one that came from the public. The ideas you talked about last fall included at least one that came from the public. Others were new. The other thing I think is really that I'm excited about and how we've modified this process is we worked with our general counsel on, how can we do this? Up to 5 of you can work together too. And I think that collaboration among advisory board members is something that this new process is kind of geared towards encouraging. So it's really up to you whether you submit your own idea from scratch or get inspired by an idea submitted by the public, or you work together with some of your colleagues here to submit an idea.
Any other questions? All right, well, thank you so much for your thoughtful questions and comments. So we will now pause for a 5-minute break. Please return promptly at 11:16 a.m. All right, thank you so much and welcome back. We will now move on to agenda item 6, presentation of Data and Tools demographic results, survey results and language access plan. I will be presenting this agenda item. So I would like to refer members to the staff report that was created for this agenda item 6. And if you're a member of the public and would like to follow along, the staff report can be accessed on the C2C website. So, as written in statute, Cradle-to-Career's governing board is intended to reflect the cultural, racial, geographical, economic, and social diversity of California. And as many of you know, in 2022, the office received a request seeking the demographic information of C2C's leadership, with a shout out, as always, to member ready for that request. Following approval from the C2C governing board, the office facilitated the collection of governing board demographic information. The first year's survey asked about race, ethnicity, and gender, as well as if board members would like to share more about lived iteration experiences in future iterations. All responses were self-reported and collected anonymously via survey, and that information was aggregated for the purposes of equity and transparency and posted to the C2C website. We as an office committed to conducting a demographic survey annually, and at the October 2023 meeting of the Data and Tools Advisory Board, members agreed to expand the survey scope to include DTAB. This year's survey for 2024-2025 was issued to members on February 6th. We will post all aggregated responses from C2C's boards, governing data and tools, and community engagement on the C2C site upon completion, but I'm going to use the next few minutes to preview DTAB's survey results. So this year's 2024-25 Data and Tools Advisory Board Demographic Survey had a 94% response rate, down from 100% from last year. However, we are grateful to those who took this survey, and we appreciate your ongoing engagement and support. We asked members to self-report on race, ethnicity, and gender, and this year 9 respondents identified as female or women, 5 as male, and 1 as gender nonconforming. In terms of breakdown by race and ethnicity, 2 members identified as Asian or Asian American, 1 member identified as Black, and 1 as Eastern European. 2 members identified as Latinx or Mexican, with 9 members identifying as white or Caucasian, including white Jewish. I would again like to voice over that all responses were self-reported by Data and Tools Advisory Board members with no predetermined categories. So this year's responses do not include individuals who identified as multiracial or more multi-ethnic, nor as Native American, Indigenous, with no members identifying as such, but that information is included in the full board's results for continuity over time. So the second part of the demographic survey gave board members an opportunity to provide information about lived experiences. And I want to thank this group for your willingness to share about your lives. C2C's advisory boards are meant to serve as voices for the public, representing the wide range of Californians that Cradle-to-Career is charged with serving, and we are grateful for your unique insights. For 2024-25, over half of respondents identified as a first-generation college student, and half also shared that they came from a low-income background. 3 advisory board members identified as immigrants, with 6 members identifying as bilingual. 3 respondents noted that they are living with a disability, and 3 members note that they provide care for someone in their household, with 3 members stating that they didn't identify with any of the named categories. We also asked members to volunteer additional information about their lives, and some members shared that they were children of refugees, while others note that they came from a mixed immigration status household. Other members shared that they were children of teen parents or from a single parent household. During these times, I want to reiterate how proud and thankful we are to have you as members. Your representation is a reflection of the state, and you all play a critical role as we continue our work to build a data system that serves all Californians. In terms of other work relative to the advisory board's purview, I'm glad to speak to you all about C2C's new Language Access Plan, or LAP, and the office's efforts to ensure meaningful access to the C2C's public tools and resources. So C2C is housed within the Government Operations Agency, and last year, GovOps directed departments to identify a language access coordinator and develop and adopt a language access plan. As C2C's equity lead, I was glad to be able to document and detail the language access work the office is already employing, such as ensuring interpretation services for public meetings or the translation of materials and products from the C2C website to fact sheets and infographics, and then lay the groundwork for expanded language access for C2C in the future. In addition to C2C's IO1, Cynthia Lopez Montes, who joined the office last fall, and serves as in a bilingual capacity and as C2C's official language access coordinator. I would like to recognize C2C staff Brittany Ortiz, Helen Fun, and Angelique Palomar, who met over the course of 2 months to research language access plans and efforts on both the national and state level, identify models and best practices for C2C, and work to operationalize language access for the office. Included in the LAP are needed next steps for the office, such as building out a C2C specific glossary so that we can communicate about wonky things like data integration or feasibility studies with folks from all walks of life. For your awareness, the office will expand on this work with the Community Engagement Advisory Board, as this is part of their scope. CAB will help us think through how we can cast a wider net for our language access survey, which asks folks about native language and the languages that they speak at home. And we're also seeking a language access liaison who will serve as a sounding board to help guide this work. But I'm sharing this with you all in case this has piqued your interest and you would like to engage further. I will never say no to smart people who care about this work. The full draft language access plan is linked in the staff report for this agenda item, and I encourage you all to take a look. We are grateful to receive feedback by April 18th, which we will take into consideration for the final language access plan that will be presented during the May 9th meeting of the governing board. So with that, that concludes my presentation. And at this time, glad to answer any questions or comments that you may have.
This is Member Mian. Thanks so much for this update. One question that I had is if the demographic survey, maybe a clarifying question, does it inform the board selection process in the future, or can it be taken into account?
It does. So Mary Kate Cruz-Jones, who's our everything board, she provides that information to the GO appointee folks every year so that they're aware just of the general information of the boards. And we just want to create a holistic picture, including the advisory boards. And as you've seen, there's been movement from the advisory board to governing board members. So just making sure that we are keeping that information up to date and includes everyone is just a helpful way for us to share that information. We don't have any authority as the office, but we can certainly share where there are potential gaps or room for growth. So that's the intent there.
Thank you.
Member Shack?
Member Shack, thank you so much for conducting the survey. Just one bit of feedback and then one question. It would be great to have some comparison points, like what was the composition last year, or something along those lines. But my question is, compared to, let's say, the governing board or other boards under Cradle-to-Career, is our composition fairly similar? It did really strike me that a clear majority are from some sort of European background, as well as female. So I'm curious if that's similar to other boards.
Historically, this board is in alignment. I would say there is a more female heavy board more than anything, but I will also say that Truly, this survey is anonymous, and I do the analysis once we close results. So if you all may have gotten some reminders for this, I closed this and started doing the analysis 2 weeks ago. So that will happen for CEAB and also happen for governing board. So we'll have a more full picture by May, but historically, it is in alignment with maybe more female presence for data and tools. And I hear you on being able to compare over time. We're going to make sure that there's a way that folks can see just the general or the past survey results, that there's a way for you to see that information more easily in the final blog that will be forthcoming.
Vikash Reddy, third year in a row. Thank you for doing this analysis. I might just suggest that the comparison I would love to see is the one to the California population, not necessarily the boards that govern. So would just recommend maybe dropping that into the blog post or in some way, shape, or form, considering how we represent the people we represent.
Awesome. I appreciate that. I will think about that. All right. Any other questions?
Member Fong, thank you so much for the language access survey. I'm really interested in the languages that you've already identified in the 5% threshold. Do you happen to have that?
So we haven't identified any in the 5% at the moment. And so that is the purpose of being able to cast a wider net. Historically, the people who respond to the surveys are people who are already following C2C and identify mainly as English speakers, native English speakers. And so the goal is for us to be able to reach more audiences that aren't so following C2C as closely as others, so that we can kind of get a better sense of who would be implicated in this work. So we're going to be working with the advisory boards to kind of disseminate that survey better. That's something that we want to make sure, because right now it's self-reinforcing. People follow these meetings, they take the survey. We will never have more languages if that's the way that we operate. So just thinking about ways that we can share the survey, have a meaningful way to collect that information in a regular cadence is the goal. It's a goal for this year for the survey. So Cynthia Lopez Montes, she revised it so that the language access survey is easily translated in Google Translate, so that we can get that out to more folks who may not be able to take the survey that it was in English initially.
And then a follow-up question to that is, let's say like a school, for example, has like a larger representation of Arabic speakers, readers, and writers. Would every individual person at that school have to submit a survey, or could an entity submit a survey on behalf of like the larger body?
That's a good question. I think if there was a larger enough group that we would be responsive to this. Again, this is not a line that's totally set in stone, and so we can use our best judgment to meet people where they are. I will say that we have a pretty robust contract, and we do have resources on tap to, I think, reach up to the top 8 languages identified by census. That's already built into our existing contract, and so it's just a matter of making sure that we go forward and translate those materials, provide interpretation services for those materials or meetings.
Maybe I would just want to advocate making that very clear, I think, for folks, whether it's like individual count or if you could represent a body in that survey.
Thank you. All right. Well, thank you so much. We will now move on to agenda item 7, discussion of advisory board member recruitment. Stephanie Gutierrez Valdez, board liaison and governance specialist, and Angelique Palomar, deputy director of communications, will be presenting this item.
Good morning again, everyone. As Shannon Serrato just mentioned, joining me today for this presentation is Angelique Palomar, Deputy Director of Communications. For this agenda item, I'd like to refer members to the staff report. If you're a member of the public and would like to follow along, the staff report can be accessed on the C2C website. As established through statute, the Data and Tools Advisory Board is responsible for examining whether the data system is providing actionable information and identifying ways to improve access to that information. So advisory board members serve staggered 3-year terms, and each year the advisory board members are appointed by the governing board in a process outlined in the governance manual to fill vacancies from advisory board members that have completed their term. So I'm kind of sad to share, but this year our fellow Data and Tools Advisory Board members, Member Borgen, Member Connor, Member Faust, Member Huff, Member Owen, and Member Reddy will be completing their term in August. So this will result in 6 vacancies, and then the term for those vacancies will be from 2025 through 2028. So it's important to note that the selection process aims to ensure a diverse and highly qualified representation across both advisory boards. So your role here as advisory board members is essential to achieving this goal. So today I'll be providing a high-level overview of the role of the Selection for Advisory Boards Committee, sharing the draft application and the draft selection process. Angelique Palomar will be walking members through the advisory board recruitment process. So in addition, we'll also discuss how the upcoming vacancies will impact the composition of the Data and Tools Advisory Board, and we will ask for member feedback on potential ideal populations for appointment and prioritization of future candidates to the current Data and Tools Advisory Board. So your insights will be shared with the Selection for Advisory Boards Committee for their consideration at their inaugural committee meeting on April 16th. So please note, the committee does have final say in the final advisory board application, rubric, selection materials, and ideal populations for appointment and prioritization. Next slide, please. Okay, an overview of the Selection for Advisory Boards committees. At the February 28, 2025 governing board meeting, the governing board voted to approve the formation of the Selection for Advisory Boards Committee, composed of 5 governing board members and the committee charter. In establishing this committee, the governing board acknowledged the significance of recruiting advisory board members with diverse expertise in advancing equity. As established in the committee charter, the committee is tasked with ensuring that the advisory boards consist of collaborative individuals with diverse perspectives and relevant expertise, thus enabling them to provide timely and high-quality recommendations to the governing board. The committee will convene for its inaugural meeting on April 16th, 2025 to approve and provide input on the application, rubric, and dissemination process plan. During this meeting, the committee will also determine the desired characteristics and expertise for advisory board members. The advisory board application forms will be posted on the C2C website for interested applicants beginning on April 28th, and the application will close on May 16th. Following this submission process window, the committee will perform an initial review and scoring of the applications received and reconvene on June 27th to discuss potential slates for each advisory board, including rank ordering runner-up candidates. The final slating of advisory board candidates will be brought forward to the governing board for their final approval at the August 15th governing board meeting. Next slide, please. So, the Data and Tools Advisory Board consists of 16 public members, which includes advocacy organization staff, community organization staff, and the end users of the data system, such as practitioners and researchers. So as we can see on this slide, there will be a total of 6 vacancies this year, out of which 3 individuals identified as practitioners and 3 individuals identified as affiliated with researcher organizations. Given their departure and pending the new selection of members, the Data and Tools Advisory Board will be composed of 2 members that represent the advocacy organizations, 2 members that represent community organizations, 5 practitioners, and 1 individual that represents a researcher organization. Next slide, please. For our visual folks, this slide here visually depicts the impacts of the vacancy analysis through 2 charts. The first one, 2025 board composition. Second, 2025 member term out analysis. Members can also find these charts in attachment A of the staff report. So as Data and Tools Advisory Board members consider which ideal populations for appointment and prioritization of future candidates categories to the Data and Tools Advisory Board to elevate to the Selection for Advisory Boards Committee, members should utilize attachment B in the staff report, member bios and term dates for a more holistic view of the Data and Tools Advisory Board. So as we can see in attachment A, There are currently no student members on the Data and Tools Advisory Board members. Members may also note that other populations that are not currently represented may include adult education and individuals representing Northern California, north of Sacramento, and the Central Valley. Next slide. The proposed 2025 Data and Tools Advisory Board application can be found in Attachment C of the staff report. I want to take a moment here to unpack the proposed application. Questions 1 through 8 are standard. Questions 9 and 10 pertain to self-identification, and questions 11 through 15 are substantive and the core of the application. The red line proposed application notes various changes to the application. However, there are 2 substantive revisions that I want to walk members through. So the first change includes the addition of the selection criteria for advisory board members. So pursuant to the governance manual, in order to ensure that advisory board members represent the public, starting in fiscal year 2024, a person who works for an organization or a person represented on the governing board may not be selected to serve on an advisory board. And an organization is defined as a state agency or representative of a segment, as opposed to providers that report to an agency. So the inclusion of this section aims to enhance clarity and transparency regarding an applicant's eligibility for appointment to the advisory board. The second substantive revision is around applicant self-identification. So when an applicant fills out the application, they're going to be asked to self-identify themselves on question 9. So whereas in previous years, applicants could select all categories that apply to their contributions, experiences, and or work, this year, the proposed application organizes self-identification into 4 distinct categories: work contributions, status as a student, status as a parent family member, and a regional level focus of work. So within these 4 categories, applicants may select only one option that best aligns with their self-identification. When the office prepares the slating materials for members voting, applications are going to be grouped into these identified categories. So the office also wants to provide some clarity regarding student self-identification. So just due to the amount of support minor applicants may need to fully engage on the advisory board and due to staff constraints, the office wants to acknowledge that advisory board applicants will be limited to individuals 18 years or older. In addition, in previous years, the office has defined students as those in undergraduate status. However, individuals who identified as a graduate student or above were categorized primarily based on their work contributions, with their student status recorded as a secondary demographic. This year, the office will maintain that same approach to ensure consistency while accurately representing individuals' primary roles and contributions. So the revisions to self-identification aims to remove ambiguity in how applicants self-identified while providing a more comprehensive perspective on how the incoming slates of candidates can enhance the diversity, lived experiences, skills, and expertise on the advisory board. Attachment D includes the proposed 2025 Data and Tools Advisory Board rubric, which will work in conjunction with the application. So the proposed rubric outlines the evaluation criteria to be utilized during the advisory board selection process. And this criteria includes community affiliation, familiarity with C2C relevant data sets, experience in data alignment and data quality efforts, and actionable experience. So at this time, I would like to ask my colleague Angelique Palomar to walk members through an overview of C2C's outreach strategy.
Thank you, Stephanie. Good morning, members. Angelique Palomar, I'm the Deputy Director of Communications here at C2C. I'll go over our outreach strategy for recruiting members to our advisory boards. Our goal is to ensure that our boards reflect California's diverse communities. So we designed a multi-pronged approach that prioritizes regional outreach, targeted engagement to key groups, and accessible communications materials. Our strategy aims to provide accessible materials that are translated in Spanish. So you'll see that the content we're creating are accessible to Spanish-speaking communities. These materials include promotional flyers, the application itself, and social media content. Regional and direct outreach. C2C's regional outreach targeting the North State, Central Valley, and Eastern Sierra is already underway. We've reached out to tribal communities, community-based organizations and foundations, student-led organizations on college campuses, and local education offices in rural and underrepresented regions. So we're sending copies of our printed flyers in both English and Spanish so that they can help amplify the application window. In addition to the regional outreach, we're connecting with local groups, other state entities, and student organizations within the Sacramento region. And we're identifying opportunities for C2C to table events and public meetings and post our flyers on bulletin boards. Lastly, you may notice that there are copies of flyers in the white manila envelopes in front of you all. Our goal is to have you take these back to your respective regions and post them in your regional public spaces, including public libraries, college campuses, your workspace, coffee shops, etc. There's a digital copy of the flyer up on the slide deck, but I also just brought them out here for you, both in English and Spanish. On the digital media front, we're utilizing digital media to provide resources and extend our reach. So we've developed a application landing page on the C2C website to house resources, the application, and key dates. We're implementing a social media strategy to promote the application period. And a key component of this social media strategy includes creating media toolkits for partners. And the toolkits will include graphics, captions, and email copies so you can easily share out within your networks. Last on the digital media front is that we're hosting a virtual community conversation on April 24th before the application window opens. And at this community conversation, viewers will have direct access to C2C to answer their questions and clarify anything about the application process. And we hope you all can join and that you can promote this informational session to your networks. Through our combination of a regional outreach approach, targeted engagement, digital media efforts, and accessible materials, we're confident that our recruitment efforts will foster an inclusive process. And we're committed to building diverse advisory boards that reflects the communities that we serve. Thank you for your help in spreading the word. With that, I'll pass it back to Stephanie.
You're going to be asked to partner with advisory board members and community members to recruit for advisory board. As I mentioned earlier in my presentation, the office will be sharing member feedback discussed today regarding the ideal population for appointments to data and the advisory board that the committee. Oops. However, I also want to ensure that it's equally important for advisory board members to actively leverage their resources, networks, and connections to encourage and recruit qualified applicants to ensure that the committee receives a diverse and well-rounded applicant pool that aligns with the advisory board's purview. So we want to thank you again for your continued support and partnership, and I'd like to now pass it back to Shannon Serrata, to guide members through questions and discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie and Angelique. We will now open it up to members for your comments, questions, or thoughts. All right. Well, thank you, Angelique. Thank you, Steph. Oh, sorry. Paul.
This is Member Harlick. As I understand it, I think I need to attend the April 16th meeting to give input on prioritization. Is that right? Of members? That's what was relayed to me in the briefing.
Yes, correct. So on April 16th, in addition to reviewing and approving the application, rubric, and selection process, the Selection for Advisory Boards Committee will also be deliberating and identifying those prioritized those prioritized and ideal populations for appointment and recruitment to the respective advisory boards. So all of the feedback that members share right now is, of course, going to be elevated for their final consideration and action on April 16th.
Should I share my thoughts now or at that meeting? Okay, well, I'm just going to repeat what I've said before, becoming a bit of a broken record. But I think I shared this time last year that I would just want to advocate for more diverse representation across the age spectrum of data that is ultimately going to be in the C2C system, especially as the system gets closer to pulling in early learning data in particular. That's it.
Member Borgen, I agree with you, Diana. Member Harlick. I'm wondering too, is there any data around the practitioners and specifically who they represent, what age groups they represent, or organizations they would represent would be helpful for to see what the spread is?
Member Terasova, I would like to thank the office for highlighting that there has been no student yet on the board as well. I started out as a student advocating for community colleges, and I think that was an invaluable experience for me to realize my passion for data and technology. Therefore, I would highly encourage all of the members here in the room to try to see if any of the students who are interested in data and tools would like to be a voice on this board as well.
I just wanted to advocate going back to the language access survey. I know our materials are in English and Spanish, but if it could be in at least 8 different languages, I think it'll help attract a more diverse pool as well. And this was Member Fong.
Thank you all for your thoughts and comments. I take into consideration all that you shared today, and so we appreciate that. Okay. Moving on to agenda item 8, presentation on and discussion of the P20W dataset and connection to the proposal process. I would again like to invite Ryan Estriado, Director of Data Programs, to present this item.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Again, Ryan Estriado, Director of Data Programs. And I would like to refer members to the staff report that was created for this agenda item. And as always, if you are a member of the public and would like to follow along, you can find that staff report on our website. Also, thank you to our Strategic Data Project Fellow, Julie Liao, for facilitating much of the work that goes into expanding our data system and also for preparing this information for me to share with you today. Next slide, please. The purpose of this item is to keep the Data and Tools Advisory Board members informed about changes in the data system ahead of the proposal process each summer. So we are winding down the proposal process now going into May, and then very shortly afterwards, we'll be spinning it back up again. And the purpose of this item is to make sure that you are aware of what's happened the last time that we talked about the data system, so you can consider those things as you ponder future proposals. Next slide, please. In the past year, the governing board voted to add 2 new data partners and also 4 new sets of data points to the P20W data system. The 2 new data providers are the Department of Developmental Services and also Scholar Share Investment Board, or SIB. The 4 new sets of data points are DDS data points. So it's a Department of Developmental Services, one of our new partners, a data set from SIB relating to CalKids, which we'll talk about in a moment, and then data from existing partners. We have financial aid data from CSU and UC, and also teacher employment related data points from the California Department of Education. And over the next few slides, I will give a high-level summary about what these data points add to the system. First up, DDS data points. The data set from DDS includes information on service eligibility, enrollment, diagnosed developmental disabilities, and DDS consumer demographics. These data points will help address questions about early education and educational and employment milestones for individuals with developmental disabilities. You can learn more about this, including the specific data points in the staff report that was written for this agenda item. And you'll find that on our website under the May 1st Governing Board meeting materials. Next, summary is about SIB, one of our new data partners. The data set from SIB includes information on CalKids account claiming, CalKids account claiming status, fund disbursement status, and also linkages to 529 accounts. For more context, CalKids offers newborns and eligible low-income public school students in California an initial seed deposit for college and career savings. And we think that these data points will help address questions related to the use of the CalKids program and also its impact on college access and affordability. As with the others, you can learn more about this item, including the specific data points that we added in the staff report, written and added to the February 28th, 2025 Governing Board meeting. That's SIB. And the next are financial aid data points. Newly added financial aid data points from our partners at CSU and also the UCs include information on the amount and type of financial aid for students attending their institutions. These data points complement data points that we've received from the community colleges and altogether make for a more complete picture about financial aid across all of our higher education institutions. You can learn more about this one in the staff report written for the agenda item, and that one is in the February 28th, 2025 Governing Board meeting. And last, but definitely not least, teacher data points from our colleagues at the California Department of Education. The newly added teacher data points from CDE include staff employment data and course information. And together with data from the Commission on Teacher Credentialing, these data points will create a more complete picture about teaching in California. For this one, you can learn more about them in the staff report written as part of the February, this is not February, I believe this one is May of 2024. I'll go back, it says February in my notes, but that's incorrect. So I'll update that one for the record later, but it is in the staff report, including the specific data points. And finally, a resource for you to look at as a reference for current data points, including ones that are already in the system and ones that are slated for future submission. Please visit the updated summary table of data points by provider on C2C's website. And with that, I'll conclude my presentation and hand the mic back to Shannon Serrato.
Thank you, Ryan. Do you members have any questions or comments for Ryan today? Member Harlick?
Yes, Member Harlick. Thank you for the presentation. For the teacher data points, would that include state preschool staff that are employed by LEAs as well? Or only K-12 staff?
Member Harlick, I knew somebody was going to ask specifically, so I have the staff report up in front of me. This is just for K-12. Yeah.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, thank you, Ryan. Moving on to agenda item 9, report out of community ambassador work of advisory board members related to Cradle-to-Career's mission and vision. So I will be leading this agenda item. This is a standing agenda item at our Data and Tools Advisory Board meetings. The governing board is committed to developing a governance culture with a focus on ambassadorship. As valued partners and collaborators in our shared vision and mission, your contributions and input are instrumental in our continued success. During this agenda item, you all can share what you've been up to related to advancing C2C's vision and mission. So with that, I'd like to open it to you all to share. I'll give folks time to think, but you all are doing great work, so I know you've got lots.
So thanks to funding from the Pritzker Foundation, we are putting together a new dashboard for foster youth in Los Angeles County that will include, it will focus on transition-aged youth, but it will include a number of education and workforce metrics.
Awesome, thank you. Any other updates from members? Oh, Member Owen, please.
Yeah, I was just going to share that we have been working with California colleges, CCGI, to create training, and we piloted a 1-semester course at CSU San Bernardino and SDSU to train graduate students on using californiacolleges.edu. And tomorrow we're doing a training for 100 school counselors from San Diego Unified who will be taking a course. It's a kickoff with a full day training tomorrow at SDSU, and then they are completing 8 modules on CCGI. So it's kind of connected to what we're doing here, so I thought I'd share.
Super connected. Thank you, Member Owen.
Member Borgen, we've convened a CalPads committee in our county office of education, supporting all of our LEAs in our county and charters. And one thing we've been doing is I've been doing an overview of what we cover in these meetings at the CalPads meetings, so our data teams at our local districts understand the work of the Cradle-to-Career initiative.
Any other updates? If you have them later, please share. We want to hear more. But at this time, we are now going to turn it over to public comment. Okay, so this is our final item before we break for lunch. Stephanie Gutierrez Valdez, do we have anyone who would like to make a public comment?
No public comment here in Sacramento. Let's move to Zoom. I will now open it up for public comment on Zoom. So I ask members of the public who wish to raise a public comment, please raise your hand at this time. At this time, I see no public comments, so I will close public comment at this time.
Great, thank you so much. So at this time, we're going to pause for a 60-minute lunch. We will return at 1 p.m. on the dot. Thank you all. All right. Thank you, members. Welcome back from lunch, and thank you for joining us. Before we get back to the work of the Data and Tools Advisory Board, we will take a quick roll call to ensure we have a quorum after returning from lunch. Stephanie Gutierrez Valdez will begin the roll call.
Member Borgen,
Present.
Member Catanzarite,
Present.
Member Connor,
Present.
Member Faust, Member Harlick, Member Huff, Member Milan,
Present.
Member Norris,
Present.
Member Ortiz Villar,
Present.
Member Owen,
Here.
Member Fong,
Present.
Member Ruddy,
Present.
Member Reed,
Present.
Member Shack,
Present.
Member Tarasova, Member Watson.
Present.
For the clarity of the record, we have 15 members present. We have a quorum.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. Okay, so moving on to agenda item 10, presentation on and discussion of the draft Data and Tools Advisory Board proposal report and feasibility studies. I would like to again invite Ryan Estriato, Director of Data Programs, and Kathy Booth, Project Director, Economic Mobility, Post-Secondary and Workforce Systems at WestEd, to present this item. Please note, one written public comments from the Data for the People Coalition was received and shared with members, as well as the public for this item.
Okay, hi, everybody. Buckle up. I'm just kidding. Okay, so hi, Ryan Estriato, Director of Data Programs. Welcome back from lunch. I'm going to go ahead and get us started on this agenda item, which will be split into two parts. First, a high-level overview of the feasibility studies, and then the most important part, conversation amongst the group, heading towards clarification of which key points you'd like to make as the proposals are presented to the governing board in May. Next slide, please. Okay, so as a quick refresher, on February 28th of this year, the governing board voted to change the feasibility study process. And in the slide here on the screen, we highlight the process as it exists for the 24-25 feasibility study cycle up until now, today, and then also what is new that you can expect in the weeks and months after this meeting. Last summer, so this is the first box here, at the joint advisory board meeting, data providers and advisory board members were present and could ask questions to guide the creation of their proposal. The next box brings us to fall. So this would be fall 2024. And at that meeting, the advisory board members discussed and advanced 3 proposals to receive feasibility studies. Between the fall meeting and today, we had the February governing board meeting where the procedure change was voted. And then now we are here today. So this is the third box that says spring DTAB on it. And at this meeting, the office will share the results of the feasibility studies for the 3 proposals, but you will also have, or you do have, light touch, what we are thinking of as light touch feasibility studies for the rest of the proposals. Following this meeting, your governing board liaison and up to 2 data and tools advisory board members will present to the governing board at the May governing board meeting and will provide a summary of the discussion that occurred here today at this meeting. The board will then take this information under advisement and consideration as it reviews the work plan at the August governing board meeting. Next slide, please. Okay, so now that we've reviewed a timeline that starts from summer of last year up until today, let's talk about something that we've pointed towards earlier in the meeting, but haven't had a chance to really give some definition to, and that is the report that will represent your discussion here today. We call this the summary report of proposals. That's the working name title. So if we use that phrase again, that's what I'm referring to. The summary report that the governing board will receive at their May meeting consists of the following items. The office will prepare some documents for you to assist you. The first is a set of documents that will be a list of all the proposals submitted in October of last year and their accompanying materials. These materials include light touch feasibility studies required in the new process. And just to help connect the dots, you've seen these studies before. They are the ones that we reviewed with you during our one-on-one meeting about your proposals in the fall. So that's the first set of documents. The second will be the feasibility studies, the in-depth ones, so not the light touch feasibility studies, the in-depth ones that were conducted by the data programs team in collaboration with WestEd. And through that process, we solicited feedback from data providers on the data availability, cost, and compliance considerations that exist with each proposal. So if the summary of the proposal report has 3 parts to it going forward in future years, for this year, where we are transitioning from an older process to a newer process, we have 2 of those 3 already for you to go. The third and the remaining one is a summary of what we discuss here that will act as the key points that you'll make to the governing board at the May governing board meeting. So with the office's support, the governing board liaison and up to 2 data and tools advisory board members can submit a summary of the discussion that occurred here today at this meeting. We recommend it. The data and tools advisory board members who are interested in participating in the governing board meeting should reach out to Stephanie Gutierrez Valdez today to express their interest. Okay, so we've talked about timelines. We've given some definition to the summary of the proposals. And now I'll preview using these calendar visuals what we can expect in March, April, and May at a high level. So first, March. The Data and Tools Advisory Board members who are interested in participating in the drafting of the report and presenting at the governing board meeting will need to submit their statement of interest by Wednesday, March 26th. So that is the green square. Should more than 2 members volunteer, the office will review all submitted statements of interest and will contact the 2 individuals selected. So the timeline here, the one that you should note, is a statement of interest is due by March 26th. Now on to April. Oops. Now on to April. To allow time for the office to review the advisory board's report, the report will, all right, page is jumping here. Okay, there it goes. The report will be due from Data and Tools Advisory Board members by close of business on April 11th. So the green square on the calendar. The report will be shared with the governing board and posted on the C2C website on April 25th. So the important timeline here, April 11th is the day that the report is due, and then April 25th is when it will appear and available to the public on our website. And final calendar preview is May. There's one big one here, which is the May 9th board meeting. The 2 Data and Tools Advisory Board members who drafted the report will present the report at the May 9th governing board meeting. So that's what you can expect March, April, and May. Earlier, I mentioned that a part of the new proposal process requires that the governing board liaison and up to 2 advisory board members draft a report for use at the upcoming May governing board meeting. And then we talked a little bit about what the components are of that report. Here, I'll talk about the goal. The goal of this report is to provide not only specific suggestions to the governing board, but also to highlight common themes or things that they should consider for the office's strategic direction. And to help prepare you for this, the office has drafted 3 guiding questions to help facilitate the discussion after the presentation of the feasibility studies. So these are the questions that we'd like for you to reflect on as we go through the feasibility studies, and they will be the starting points and foundation for the discussion that Kathy will be leading us through after the summary feasibility studies. The 3 questions are, number 1, which proposals are most feasible and have the highest potential impact? The second, what additional context should be included in the presentation to the governing board? And then the final reflection question, are there any potential risks or drawbacks that need to be discussed? Okay, so far we've talked about what's happened since we last met in October, and now we're going to turn to what will happen today. For the rest of this agenda item, we're going to discuss the proposals that we received in October. And by the end of this agenda item, you will have reached these 3 important steps. First, you will have received a presentation of the feasibility studies and their key considerations. Second, you will have had the opportunity to discuss them with other Data and Tools Advisory Board members. And three, Kathy Booth will act as a moderator to help facilitate discussion and reflect back the considerations and themes from your discussion to make sure that we have them clear in the notes. And now on to the first of the three proposals. Just a reminder, these are the in-depth proposals from the previous process. This will be the last year that we'll be doing them in this form, but in the following years, we will be doing light touch feasibility studies on not just three, but all of the proposals. So let's begin. In total, there are three proposals that were advanced to a formal feasibility study in the meeting we were all at together, October of 2024. And those three are the Digital Access to Learning proposal by Member Borgen, the Student Debt at Colleges and Universities proposal by Member Shack, and the Weaving Disaggregated Multilingual Learner Data proposal by members Orlick and Owen. For detailed research questions, you can view the proposal on the website. I'll note also that there were three additional proposals that were submitted by the Data and Tools Advisory Board members for consideration at the fall meetings. These proposals did not receive an in-depth feasibility study per the previous procedure, but they did receive light touch feasibility studies. And these three are graduate school completion rates by field of study by Member Shack, including internship and first destination survey data by Member Fung, and tracking child savings accounts data also by Member Fung. Again, these proposals and research questions can be viewed on the website. Okay, I think for most of you, this is an old hat. You know what goes into the feasibility studies, but we do have new members, so let's do a quick high-level overview. What goes into a feasibility study? These are in-depth feasibility studies conducted on the three proposals you voted on in October. And the in-depth feasibility studies were designed to ensure that the office examined questions of data availability and reliability, also cost, and finally compliance prior to investing resources to implement the proposals. Let's go through each of these really quickly. First, about data. We analyze feasibility of the data by looking at availability and reliability, including differences in data collection across institutions and agencies. The second is cost. The cost component of the study is to ensure the impact of a proposal is understood both in the context of how it will affect the office, but also how it will affect data providers. In addition to looking at startup costs, the office also considers how ongoing maintenance of the proposed data elements would affect the office and data providers. And then finally, compliance. The compliance part of the feasibility study looks at questions of how the proposal aligns with the legal requirements of the office, whether it is aligned with the scope described in the Cradle-to-Career Act, and also if it poses challenges for the office's role as a neutral reporting entity. With that now, I'll do a brief overview of the three proposals that received an in-depth feasibility study, and then after that, we'll wrap up this agenda item with the most important part, I think, with a facilitated discussion. First, digital access. This proposal recommends the addition of the following data points into the P20W data system. It recommends data about internet access and speeds, data about devices that students use and their availability, and also data about support and infrastructure for high-speed internet. On the next slide is a summary of feasibility. I'll make some key points about feasibility, but you can find more details in the report itself, but these are the highlights. Because data providers do not collect these data points currently, the focus of this study was on understanding what it would take to begin and then continue collecting the proposed data points. Existing data providers don't collect this information. That's one of the findings. The data providers can't collect it in a way that can reflect an individual student's lived experience. So there are agencies that collect related data, but in a way that isn't easily linked with individual rows in the Cradle-to-Career data set. And then about cost, the costs of the local education agency are reported to be significant. Final point on this for your consideration is that the proposal to track utilization of broadband funding would require substantial office resources, and members should also consider the uncertainty around funding and what would happen if the office invested time and resources into tracking funding use and then had a future where that funding was then no longer available. So those are some things to consider as you discuss digital access. And now we'll turn to the feasibility study about multilingual learners. This proposal recommends the addition of the following data points into the P20W data system: data about student language, data about instructional settings, and then also data about preschool settings. Here's a high-level overview, highlights from the feasibility funding. Because it is possible for the office to derive many of the requested data points from ones that already exist in the system, we identified reliability and availability considerations if we were to calculate those metrics, and I'll give some key findings. The first is that, as you said earlier, the office can derive many of these data points themselves based on data already within the system. But one finding that is important to consider is that the way that the office can compute that metric would not perfectly align with the way that CDE currently collects data, particularly on the LTEL and the RTEL data points. So another way of saying that is it is possible to approximate the requested data points. If we do it in the way that we believe we can do it, it will not be a perfect match to the way it's defined through CDE, something to consider. The second is that the office cannot distinguish individuals who have been reclassified from ELL prior to 2011 and 2012, which is a result of the way that the data was collected and the data definitions. Third consideration, during the 2020 and 2021 planning process for C2C, the working group who analyzed related data recommended that we not include proxies for immigration status in the P20W data system. For more, you can see publicly available notes from that discussion in the link here on the slide. And then finally, regarding the request for data from CDE's future CapStack system, one thing to note here, important thing to note, is that the CapStack system will not be available for data sharing until for the proposal until 2025, during the 2025 year, and will require additional time for validation efforts after it's built. That's multilingual learners will now move to the final of the proposals that received an in-depth feasibility study. This is the one about financial aid. This proposal recommends the addition of the following data points into the P20W data system. First, data about subsidized loans. Second, data about unsubsidized loans. Third, data about Grad Plus loans. And then finally, data about the amount of Parent Plus loans. And like with the others, full report and feasibility findings are in the report, but here I'll give some highlights of the findings that I hope are useful for the conversation we are about to have. First is that these data are currently collected by our higher ed segments, so community colleges, CSU, and UCs, but cannot be readily shared. Second, data providers did have some concerns that they can't provide financial aid data beyond what was approved at the May 1st governing board meeting. So recall in my earlier agenda item, we talked about data points that we added. Financial aid was one category of those data points. Third, there were concerns on the part of data providers that providing additional information could pose some compliance risk to them and jeopardize students' access to financial aid. And then the final feasibility finding, this is again a point of view from our data providers, that reporting of parental loans may fall outside of existing reporting norms and could cause confusion for consumers of this information. And this related to what currently exists on the financial aid dashboards from some of our data providers, and imagining what it would look like if we visualized these data points in comparison to the ones that are currently available. Okay, those are the 3 in-depth feasibility studies, just a high-level overview, key findings to support your conversation. Before we open things up for the most important part of this, which is the facilitated discussion with help from Kathy, I want to remind folks of these, what I hope are helpful reflection questions. First, which proposals are most feasible and have the highest potential impact? Second, what additional context would you like to include in the presentation to the governing board in May? And then finally, are there any potential risks or drawbacks that need to be discussed? Kathy and I can provide additional details on the feasibility studies as you discuss, but we want to make sure that you have this time to gather your thoughts and then decide what you would like to share with the board. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Kathy to get us started.
Thanks, Ryan, and it's great to be back with you all. What I thought we would do is actually consider each of the proposals in turn. So you have a chance to sort of look holistically at each one rather than sort of set up a competitive environment across the proposals. So I thought we could start with the digital access proposal. And so I'm curious to hear your thoughts about whether this seemed feasible to you, if you thought there'd be a great deal of impact for having this information be in the C2C system, and what it is you'd want to tell the board about those issues of feasibility and impact.
So Member Watson, I'll ask a question. So the data is not currently being collected. And are there any examples of C2C working with other agencies or contributors to collect new data? Have those kinds of discussions come up? Because I know there's a cost factor here, but there's also is the data available? You know, where would it be? Where would it ideally come from?
I cannot think of one that looks exactly like what the feasibility study suggests we would need to do to collect these. I can think of one related example, which may or not be helpful, but could just help to sort of build the imagination of, you know, something that maybe looks like this. Is we've had some conversations with the Commission for Teacher Credentialing about data related to teacher residencies. That's not data that's currently being collected in the system, but it was and is a conversation that feels collaborative and aimed towards collecting data that's not collected. I think the similarity there is it sort of shows what's possible because it's not currently collected. Where that situation might be different from this one is that there are clear and defined use cases in the C2C sort of plan for data dashboards. And because of that, I think there's language and context for where that would be needed, plus mechanisms through CTC where if that were collected, they would have the infrastructure already to collect it. So there's some similarities and also differences there, but nothing that I know of exactly like this. I'm happy to hear from the rest of the team if there are other views.
This is Member Fong. My first thoughts are just bummer. It sucks that they don't collect this data. I thought I read somewhere in the initial like proposal and documents that we could use like the broadband map to help us map that. But how is that not part of this?
Yeah, so I'll answer that at a high level, but we also have Dr. David Lang here who knows this stuff really well, and he can add more detail. But my understanding of that is that the broadband map exists, so this is a tool that exists. But in the way that the data points are proposed to be added into the system, are missing the necessary elements to link to individual records. So if you sort of think of earlier in the agenda item with all the different data points that we've recently added, what all of those have in common is that they can be linked to individual records in the data system, which then empowers us to use them for publicly available tools and things like that. And the map does have broadband data available by location, but no way to integrate it into the system on an individual level.
Member Borgen, so the maps do not have addresses that you can be linked to student addresses from CalPads, for example?
Yeah, so my understanding is that it does have address data, but in looking at it during the feasibility study, there's a number of ways in which linking by that address data could end up having more uncertainty than we'd be comfortable with because of changing addresses, uncertainty around addresses in general for particular students. And then I believe, David can correct me if I'm wrong on this too, but there was also some questions about how it linked to addresses of schools and how reliable that was also.
Every year in California, students have to annually update their addresses, as so those records are as good as what CalPads has. Because CalPads has the updated student addresses. And so, but the feasibility of that is not credible.
I'll turn to David to see if he's got more to add there.
David Lang, research manager speaking. So there are potential matches, but there are also considerations of the coverage of how accurate the individual parcel level data itself is. David Lang, research manager. There are also considerations as to how accurate the individual parcel and address level data is. And even if, for instance, broadband service is available at an address, the question of whether or not a student has a subscription and has purchased it is less clear.
So knowing that there is some data that could be mapped, but that really would not get down to the individual student level, what would you want the board to know about that? I mean, I certainly hear the feeling that it would be really wonderful to have the data in the system, but given that limitation, what would you want to tell the board?
Member Borgen, I think there's a lack of individualized data collection, an important piece that the Tools and Advisory Board feel comfortable about pushing forward for important data collection to research the effects of digital tools for learning. I know 10 years ago there was a individualized set of surveys that went out to individual students, and so is there availability to advocate for the ability that data to be collected in future legislation or opportunities for LEAs to receive information from the California Department of Education for supporting that type of data collection in the future? I know that's not directly for this governing board, but again, I think seeing there's a big gap in this data being collected and the importance of these metrics, I would like to advocate for that piece and the governing board to understand the importance of these types of metrics towards the growth of students and their success.
So do others agree that it would be helpful to sort of request of CDE that this data get collected in the future? I'm seeing some nodding heads. Does that
get into that? Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead?
No, I mean, I think that, but I think.
Your mic, please. And
Sorry,
please,
Vikash Reddy. I think we've sort of gone down that path before, right? Of like, are we asking the board to make recommendations to CDE? But I do think I mean, to the extent that we all feel like this is good data to collect, I feel like we should maybe avail ourselves of our voice to say this would be great data to have. Yeah.
Member Faust. So just a clarification then, would that mean that this recommendation or project would move forward as something on which the governing board would then vote? Or is there time to consider as a advisory work group that maybe we could think about changing a recommendation? I'm just kind of wondering about the process that we're engaged in right now.
Good question. Thank you for asking it. One of the intents and benefits of the new process is that the proposal would go to the board with essentially your comments about it. So the board then would take that under consideration for as they think about what to prioritize for the annual work plans. But there's my understanding of the process, and Stephanie, correct me if I'm wrong here, is that it is meant to include your thoughts about the proposal as it stands now or as a result of today's conversation. And the two advisory board members that work with the governing board liaison would then work to make sure that that is reflected in the notes in the report that then get presented to the governing board for discussion in May.
but they're not necessarily doing an up or down vote. That might just lead to a conversation that they would have. Oh, Marianne, were you going to? Okay.
Fabulous, thank you. And Member Faust again. Another question, I love integrated data. Integrated data is the thing. However, could, us consider an opportunity to bring in geographically placed data or data that could be linked at not at an individual level, but just to inform the gaps in services for students across California? Just a question, not pushing us in one direction or another, but thinking about the unit of linkage as geography at a higher level as well.
Yeah, thanks for the suggestion. I've noted it in the notes, and then we can reflect that back later to make sure that it's stated clearly to make sure that you have that available to you as you decide what goes into the report.
And to make it just a little bit more tangible, because I think that's really helpful right now as we're really getting to the place where the data system is beginning to put out public products. Would you want to see that as, for example, a visualization on a dashboard or a filter on a data set? Or how are you thinking that would be used?
Well, and Member Borgen, you can feel free to jump in here as well. When I was originally considering the inclusion of these data sets, I actually wasn't thinking about it as linked at an individual level to children. I was more envisioning it as an overlay of, let's say, like a heat map almost, with overlapping sections where you can really see, a radius or diameter of a broadband range. And then, areas where there really just isn't any overlap. Thinking about just creative visualizations that might highlight areas of disparity.
Does that match what other people have in mind as you're imagining the types of data that are available that could be included? I'm seeing some nodding heads. Does anyone disagree?
Member Borgen, I thank you, Member Faust, for that addition. Yeah, I think that's one way to do it as well. Another piece I want to refer to is the data for the people response, and specifically mentioning focusing on institutional level as well. And I'm not sure if that is where that is on the roadmap of the dashboard, but looking at institutional level data that they mentioned would also be a nice alternative method for this.
And so specifically, you would imagine that that would be attached to the institution that a student might be enrolled in, whether that be a K-12 institution or say a community college or a four-year?
Correct, correct. And then you will be able to use federal data as well to see if these LEAs also use discounts provided by the federal government for internet services and internal connections, which is provided at the institutional level as well.
Oliver Shack. This is more of like a contextual question, but one question that I have remaining on the funding side is, and I like all of the alternatives that have been expressed, but in terms of efforts that would require more resources, like is there the possibility of other funding sources, foundations, somebody who's like really interested in this topic who's willing to fund this, because it feels like one of those topics where there might be opportunities out there. So that if there's an ability to do like a quick scan of like, is that a possibility either now or down the road, I think that would be useful to have.
So I want to ask a clarifying question about that. So there's the cost of implementation. So let's pretend that there was going to be a heat map like was described. So the funding for the staff of the office to actually develop that visualization is one level. The other is the funding to annually survey every child in the state to see what their broadband access is. Which were you thinking?
Yeah, so I think I'd be looking for that kind of discussion of, well, that kind of external funding is probably a one-time thing. So it may have to do more with initial implementation or some sort of pilot like a heat map. But you could also look into the possibility of ongoing funding as well.
Are there any risks or drawbacks that you would see in this proposal that you'd want the board to consider?
Member Fong, my day job is definitely fundraising, and so it is very exciting to hear about, this opportunity because I can see employer companies really taking a bite of it and potentially funding it. I think the risk truly is like being able to maintain that fund and having somebody who is focused on not just the initial initiative and fundraising effort, but actually the maintenance of it. And there are a lot of surveys, y'all. So not only to the integrated data, but like how do we integrate this into the everyday surveys that our students and families are taking and collecting and like reporting it is like a challenge, I think, that we're already asking of our practitioners.
Member Norris, I notice in the analysis that if we did go down this path of surveying, that the data would probably be pretty incomplete, that the response rate would be low. And I think that's a risk that needs to be considered. I also didn't fully understand in the analysis, and I don't think it needs to be explained further, but I do think that the governing board should pay attention to the comment that legislation may be needed to collect some of the data. That would seem to be a bit of a risk.
Member Catanzarite, it seems that the contextual level data would be obviously a lot less expensive to collect and presumably would open the door to other geographic data, institution level data, and maybe the governing board might start with the contextual level question and come back to the question of linking to individual student data at a later point.
Member Faust, totally agree. I also think, though, that making a a pivot, right? Or an enhancement of the C2C to think about including that contextual level of geographic data could be a risk in terms of muddying the waters or opening kind of the criteria for the types of data to be included. So yes, could be a great benefit and also a risk.
Member Watson, can I understand something though, just in general about the system itself? It seems to be that everything that's the premise that we're operating on, or C2C is operating on, is that it's a unitary level data set of data that are matched at the student or the individual level. So if that's true, and that's the focus right now, and that's where all the work has been done, then the concept of having say overlays at a higher level is really interesting, because it's not just information about access to, geographically demonstrating where there is or isn't access to certain types of broadband, or questions like that are feasible to be done, but has it been something that has been discussed at all as something on the roadmap in the future, or do I even have that wrong? I've made the assumption all along that it's operating on the individual level, that all the matching occurs as best possible at that level.
So I can provide some historical context as the facilitator during the planning process. So as the list of data points were being developed that should be included, the core of it is what happens to people. So we can follow them over time and across engagement with different institutions. But there's also a suite of data points that are contextual, because there's an understanding that we don't just succeed by our own efforts. So a good example would be if you are going to a high school that doesn't actually offer all the A through G courses that you need to be eligible to go to CSU, then that's not your fault if you don't complete them. So there are a small cluster of contextual data points, but those were intended to be implemented further down the road. So if you look at the initial list of dashboards that were going to be developed, those were mostly student journey related, with the idea at the time that the contextual information would be more valuable in things like the query builder, or when people were doing a research request to be able to get additional contextual information. Now, remember, the planning process was 5 years ago, so thoughts move on. But part of what I'm hearing from you all is that there's an interest in the idea of looking at institutional variables, and that you see that as both a possible benefit or a risk, depending on whether you have clear criteria, and that this question of broadband raises that question again. It gives a place for the board to think about where that fits in to the data system when we're talking just at the level of what's available for the geomaps. And then in addition to that, what I'm hearing is that there's a real value in understanding individual access to these resources, but there's concerns about how that could be underwritten in a long way, and the survey burden on individuals. Do I have that about right for the discussion? Anything that I missed?
Member Harlick, yeah, I would just want to add an overarching concern around, I get advocacy for new original data collection, siloed from a larger discussion around where we might also, other types of subjects that we might want to advocate for original data collection around, because it could be an infinite number of those. And it seems like we would want to understand the trade-offs around advocating for one type of original data collection that would then create less room for other types of data collection. I obviously have my biases, in my dream world, I would be advocating for a survey that asks parents what their kids' preschool status was, right? Because with the existing system, we can only get that for about, I think it's less than 20% of kinders will understand their preschool status, because less than 20% of kinders are in our publicly subsidized preschool systems. To me, that, while I don't debate the value of this type of data, to me that would be more important in terms of tying to outcomes and predictive ability and things of that nature. So I'd rather us consider, how do we have a discussion about new data collection, which there would be a limited capacity to do without weighing all the different options for that. I feel like it's getting out of our scope, because our mandate mostly is to consider data that already exists, right? So I just think there would need to be a better process for identifying how we prioritize that.
This is Member Ortiz VR. Maybe this is unrelated, maybe a proposal for next cycle. But I found this section about staff supporting digital literacy really interesting in the feasibility study about thinking about skills and whether students are receiving those skills. And I think that aligns really well with like the passport conversation that we had earlier of like, if we are going to be mapping those career skills in the future already, like how can that the digital literacy be a part of that and be highlighted in some respect, and kind of honor this proposal without it being so directly linked to like individual broadband data.
All right, if there's nothing else, I'm going to move us on because I want to make sure we've got time for each proposal. So let's go to a very different one, which was about debt. So this is where there is data, but there's concerns about it being shared. So what are your thoughts that you want to say to the board about feasibility and impact?
Maybe I can, this is Member Shack, and this is my proposal, so maybe I'll just kick it off. Yeah, I still consider these data points really important. I think we have an exciting data visualizations that are about to be released on student pathways, and I think that that's like, it kind of screams when you view those visualizations that that's like kind of a missing piece in my opinion. So it's important for decision making and family and students' decisions. And the data seem to be there. It seems to be a lot of discussion around authority and legal issues and displaying things in a comparable and fair way. And I think we can discuss that more as a board. I also will have some thoughts, but I think I'll talk about them a little bit later around risks and context for the governing board. But I'll just leave it there, and I'm interested to hear what people have to think.
This is Member Fong. I absolutely think that this is important. And if we aren't fully capturing it, I would want to go back to the data providers and I don't know, question again, I guess. Is this a compliance risk and a jeopardization of students' access to financial aid something that they actually like know that they can point to in a policy? Or is this something that they're like feeling? And really try to push that a little bit. Obviously, I wouldn't want to risk any student's access to financial aid. And so if that truly is a risk, then I'm more than happy to strike this as a recommendation for a proposal, just because I definitely don't want to see that.
Yeah, Member Ortiz VR. I think, yeah, just to plus one what everybody's saying, I think this is an important time why this is important, why this data is important, and why, if we know that some of our federal agencies might be scrapping some of their public data, like this is the time for us to not do that and maybe elevate that a little bit more. So yeah, I just want to emphasize the importance of being to potentially elevate this information, knowing that in the next 4 years, maybe that won't be as available at the federal level.
Member Borgen, there was, Ryan presented earlier that the new data points around financial aid to being added. How is that different or similar to this request? Is it just financial aid, not debt? Is that accurate? Or you can share a little about the added data points?
I think the best way to describe the distinctions is this is sort of double click. What Member Shack is proposing is sort of double clicking on the debt categories that we're currently collecting. So we collect currently state, federal, and other institutional loans. this would be breaking that down a little bit further into subsidized versus unsubsidized, that and some of the other components they mentioned.
I'll add also that if I remember correctly, the Member Shack, the original proposal was more expansive, had more data points, and I believe was amended in response to the ones that we were bringing in May. So there was some overlap, I think, in the original proposal that were covered by the new financial aid data points coming in May. Do I have that right?
Yes, and I don't remember exactly which ones were which, but I would just add that one thing I didn't mention is the private student loans piece, really having sort of crisp information on that because it is of value because those loans tend to be riskier and don't carry the same protections. So it just, I think my proposal, it just kind of drills into those categories in a clearer way than maybe the current data that's reported. And Parent Plus, I'll just cover Parent Plus right now. That I think having that information, I know that's a little bit more controversial with data providers, but I think it would be of value to have a more complete picture of student debt. At the same time, you want to have sort of comparable comparisons. So if some segments can't report that, you may want to separate that out in a visual or the way it's displayed. But I would just note for a context that the college scorecard data set does have information on Parent Plus loans, including outcomes, as well as FSA data center. So I would kind of disagree a little bit with what providers said about that not being sort of a data point that's widely reported.
So what I'm hearing is that there's a sense that this is really valuable, especially right now when we want to make sure that we've got as much data available as possible. And that the hope would be that the data providers would sort of reconsider how great the risk is to provide more detail and above and beyond the additional financial aid data that they're already providing. Does that seem about right? Anything else you'd want to add to the thoughts you want to share with the board?
I just think one point for consideration, if you think about risk, is that this landscape, particularly for federal student aid, is shifting so rapidly that any work that's done to bring that data in might need to take that into account. The need to be flexible as the data may change in the coming years. Oh, this is Member Norris. Sorry.
I did have a question for the team. I don't think you all mentioned cost. Is there an additional cost to this, to the data providers or to the office?
Do you want to answer that, David, or do you want me to? The costs were minimal. I mean, there's definitely the work of getting things set up to share the information, especially if it's not currently being stored in that way easily, but it was more of a setup rather than an ongoing cost.
This is Member Mian. Definitely echoing the potential risk of just like the changing landscape from Member Norris. And I mean, there was definitely a lot of interest right in this data last year with like the new FAFSA rollout. And so I feel like communities, families, students it's very much on their mind. So I think like taking that into account, that there's a need for reliable data and reliable information on what's going on, but then also weighing like the risk of like having a plan to collect or operationalize this data, but then that plan kind of going out the window if things change too rapidly. So just echoing that comment of potentially being careful and thinking about like the context behind this data, like the very recent rollout, but also what might be happening in the next few months even.
Just last comment from me. I just wanted to address the risk of losing financial aid access. So one question is, Is it still the case that staff have a neutral opinion, no opinion on loss of financial aid?
For that item, what was important for us to do in the feasibility study was to reflect what the data providers said. I don't know that we have a specific position for or against that, but turning to my colleagues to see if they have more to add.
I would just echo what Ryan said. I think we're aiming to reflect our data provider's position on this, and their assessment of the risk, given that they're the higher education entities.
Yeah, so I'm not a lawyer, clearly, but I think I would like to express that I think if that's sort of a justification for not moving forward, I would encourage some sort of like a legal analysis on that. I would just say from my own background, I think if you look at the HEA, it prohibits like a substantial linking of an SLDS with other data systems. I don't think I think this data is not detailed enough and not sort of broad enough to really qualify for that. And I also don't really see a enforcement mechanism where institutions could suddenly lose access to those programs. So I view it as a low risk, but I would encourage analysis.
I can provide some history from the planning process because we actually had representatives from the Privacy Technical Assistance Center from the Federal Department of Ed come and address the working group because this issue was a concern from the beginning. And I can tell you, we never got absolute clarity. The answers seemed to be always leaving just a little bit of blurriness in a way that I think was difficult for everyone involved because I think people wanted a clear answer and then there just was not a clear answer that was obviously being given. So I think that there's room for interpretation on both sides of the line. And the guidance that came out this past fall did not actually directly address SLDSs or student, the type of database system that C2C has. So there has been no further clarity beyond what was there 4 or 5 years ago. All right, anything else on the debt question? All right, so let's turn to multilingual learners. So this was a sort of our in-between where there is data, but the way it could be calculated could be different. There's other data that will be here, but it's not here yet. So what are your thoughts about feasibility and impact for this particular item or set of data points?
Member Harlick, I noticed that in the analysis, it was mentioned that there are different definitions for the different categories of English learners. And that, so I'm wondering what that looks like, and then what would be the determination for resolving those definitions in order to utilize the data.
So I definitely don't want to understate the level of nuance here. But what I can share is that the way our office receives English language learner status is that we understand whether or not a student is classified as an English language learner in the year that they are enrolled. What that means is when a reclassification event occurs, they no longer show up as an ELL learner in that particular academic year in the manner in which our office receives the data. So what that means is particularly for historical and longitudinal comparisons for going back to 2011, 2012, we are not in a position to identify if students who did not start kindergarten at or after that time were ever ELL. or ELL. Additionally, I'm not too familiar with all of the nuances there, but I would also highlight that the assessment data our office receives is only the LPAC, which is the more recent assessment for ELL status. There was a transition during this collection period as well. And so some of the psychometric properties, as well as the additional information that might be collected, might need additional reconciliation effort.
There was also a policy issue. So for example, sometimes the number of years that somebody has been learning English is not the same in different contexts. And so one of the concerns was like, if this body sort of recommended a particular definition and it was different for CDE, or if there was someone was trying to look at it in a policy context that was assuming a certain number of years and CDE had done it differently, even if the data system aligned with CDE, that it could cause some confusion. So the parallel to this had to do in the planning process with foster youth status. So there's a very specific definition for foster youth in the K-12 system. And that is not as comprehensive as what could be found if you went directly to Health and Human Services Agency data. Similarly, there was an issue in the post-secondary because it's a self-report about whether you were a foster youth, and people may or may not choose to do that. In fact, early attempts to build dashboards showed that that self-reported data was pretty low quality. So there was a decision made in the planning process after a pretty extensive consultation with researchers that it was worth having the most expansive and accurate definition possible, which means that the data comes from the Health and Human Services Agency as opposed to what's in CDE, and that's clearly marked in the notes. So there is a way around this, but I think it would require some real clarity. And when we were trying to sort of make sure that we understood what the definition of these terms would be in the beginning of this feasibility study process, we may not have had the best source of information. And so it sort of leaves open a possibility for discussion. But that again depends on whether this gets back to, is this really feasible and would it be very impactful to have the information?
This is Member Norris. I noted in the analysis that originally in the planning process, it was decided not to include immigration status for individuals. And I think that that creates an issue or could create an issue with this data. And I just was wondering if we could hear a little bit more about that.
I can share from the planning process. The concern was that that information could be used to identify undocumented individuals. And at the time, that was something that the committee did not want to address.
Yeah, I would just add that I think that concern still exists, probably even more so.
Member Mian, also wanted to bring up and maybe also thinking about like how it's framed in proposals, but also like the report back to the governing board, making the clear distinction between like immigration status and legal status. Because if it's like immigration status, immigrant, non-immigrant, or are we thinking about like legal status where if someone's like a refugee, asylum seeker, undocumented, has a visa, so like adding the complexity, right? So that there's less confusion around exactly why it might be a risk to include certain data points. I feel like that would be helpful in the communication, but I think also I'm just even thinking about the future of the proposal process. Like if I or anyone else was interested in potentially submitting a proposal around undocumented youth, young adults, then having some of that guidance, I think, upfront would be really helpful because there is right now, especially right, a lot of interest in supporting immigrant communities, youth from mixed status families. So I think maybe just knowing some of that historical background of why it's not included currently and you know, those decisions would really be informative to the public, but just anyone that might want to submit a proposal. And again, you know, just really emphasizing the complexity of immigration status, legal status, and these terms, and why not, and just including like all of that clarity would be really helpful.
Yeah, Member Ortiz Villar, just want to, support what Member Mian just said. And I think having that clarity from like the stance of like C2C as the office or the board, like maybe more guidance or like a matrix of like at what point are we collecting data for, as Member Mian said, like undocumented folks versus immigrant folks versus so and so. Because I think I understand why we're not, and I agree on why we're not collecting that data. And I think there's like a missed opportunity to like learn about those communities if we're not. And so maybe in the future we can think about like similar to how we were thinking about the broadband conversation, like contextually, like general information about these populations, even if it's not identified at the student level, I think could still be a like a pretty good opportunity um, for this office to like have that data available for researchers in the future.
This is Member Catanzarite. Thank you to my three previous colleagues for these comments. I was going to ask a similar question around the original conversation around not including immigration status and what was meant by immigration status to Member Milan's point. We're not, I don't believe, asking about undocumented versus documented status, but whether someone is an immigrant. If there could be some clarification on that, that would be helpful. And then as those of you who are on the workforce, Kathy and John, Member Watson, who are on the Workforce Data Task Force know I have suggested that the Workforce Data Task Force include information on whether someone is an immigrant, year of arrival, those issues. I had a side conversation with one of my colleagues at CHIRLA, the Campaign for Humane Immigrant Rights Los Angeles, to understand if they had concerns around these kinds of data. And the answer that I got back was not with proper data protection. So this comes back to the proper data protections that C2C is implementing. There are and so if there's a concern around data protections in general, it would be helpful for this body to understand that, because immigration is not the only sensitive data point that we're talking about collecting.
I don't know that I can give a lot more nuance to the discussion that was held in the planning process, except to say that at the time, the requests were, can you please make sure there is nothing in the data system that would allow an undocumented person to be identified? And given that we had already at that point expanded the scope of the data system like 200% bigger than what people thought it was going to be at the beginning, I think that there was this sense of, let's get rolling with a bunch of data points. And so things like having English language learner data points were considered to be a good starting place. But I again want to emphasize that planning process was happening 5 years ago before we could even dream of this office existing. And so I think it's worth you all thinking about what you want to say to the governing board now about the types of data that you think should be in the data system and how it should be handled.
Clarification question. Do we currently collect information on the languages spoken by students just broadly? Or language spoken at home?
We do collect that information through the Department of Social Services, I believe. And I would need to consult with our SDP fellow, but we might be receiving additional related data points through DDS.
Member Fong, sorry to get off of that. Totally agree with what everybody said, but the first bullet point says that you all can actually derive the data points for this feasibility study, but it's not going to be aligned with CDE's reporting. How much effort is that for you all to pull that, those data points?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of effort, the practice of deriving metrics from existing data points is something that there's no additional effort than what we already do to build something like the dashboard, for example, or cut file extracts. I think the thing to think about there is less about the effort it would take to do that, but more in a scenario where we did do that, how can we best explain to the public that what we are what the office is calling LTEL or RLTEL is not exactly the same as the data point that CDE has, which is also called by the same name. So these are explainable things, but it's also understandable that it does get kind of confusing when you've got these two kind of jargony sort of things that are defined in two different ways. But from an effort standpoint, deriving metrics it's part of the regular workflow when we build products.
Yes, it does make me wonder about just the clarity of what this means for the end user. I'm a second language learner or English language learner person, and I don't ever think of myself as like an English language learner. Even when I was a child, like somebody had to give that definition to me. And so I just want to think about like, I really like this data. I think it's important, but how do we actually like make it usable for our end users of students and families? And maybe being clear on the definitions and making it more layman's terms would be helpful.
Okay, so I want to go back and see if I can sort of repeat back to you what I heard. So what I heard is that it's important to recognize that there's a difference in the distinction between whether one is undocumented or an immigrant, and that there are different levels of data that could be available. And if the stance is being taken by the governing board about what can or cannot be in the system, that should be explicit. That it would be worthwhile looking at whether information could be provided in a way that would keep individual identities secure. And that would require a conversation to figure out like what that would mean and whether it's like we were talking earlier with the overlays, like what percentage of the population here are immigrants or whether we're doing something more nuanced. But that whatever we do, we have to make sure that we're putting things in layperson's terms when we're developing data tools so that we're not creating information that would be confusing to members of the public. Is that about right? Anything that I missed? Yeah.
Member Harlech, just to Member Fong's previous point, I think my assumption when I read this proposal, and I think what the folks who sponsor it meant was to default to the CDE definitions for these categories, right? Which are based on testing, right? Whether, and some local determination actually, about whether a student is English language proficient or not yet. And that status within the system is very linked to outcomes later, right? And has been, studied in innumerable places. So I guess now I'm questioning, do we all have that same understanding or not? I think that would be the place to start potentially. And within the English language learner category, there are other subcategories, which are all of those ones articulated here and that are now available for the general public to look at, right, through DataQuest and all that stuff. And so I do just want to say that I think that including these in the C2C are valuable and would allow the field to look at a number of different things that are tied to later outcomes for students who are designated as English language learners.
So what you're basically saying is you'd like to request CDE to provide the data points in the way that they calculate them or the formula necessary for C2C to be able to replicate those?
That was my assumption, I guess. Yeah, that we would default to the CDE definitions. And to me, that makes the most sense and is the easiest way forward. Now, all of that aside, of course, the problem for early young students exists as it does across the board for early childhood data. So hopefully that gets resolved in out years, pulling in the younger kids as well. But yeah, I don't know if they're going to be on for public comment later and can clarify that, the people who sponsor the proposal. But to me, that seems like the best way forward.
Member Morgan, I agree with that as well. I think if you look at some publicly available dashboards right now with the California School Dashboard, that's exactly what's aligned in that California School Dashboard. So this would align to the California Schools Dashboard reference of English learners and long-term English learners as well. that's referenced in the California Schools dashboard.
So Joe, does agree that the request to CDE is to provide those data points? I'm sorry, I want to see like a nod of heads or raise your hand if that's what you would like to say to the governing board. I'm seeing nodding heads all around the room. Okay, great. Anything else on this one? Okay, so what I want to do is turn our attention then to the three proposals that you did not vote on last fall to include, but which were included in your packet materials. So as a reminder, that was graduation rate. So the number of people who completed particular graduate degree programs, the number of folks who are finishing internships or had taken a career and technical education course, and the inclusion of the first destination survey data about what happens to students after they leave. And the final was about data on CalKids, which is the savings account for children. I'm sort of putting them all out together. I'm curious to see if there's any in particular that you all would like to comment on or raise to the board related to thoughts that you have about those types of data. Yes, Marianne.
This is Marianne. I don't have a substantive thought here, but just more of a long-term infrastructure thought for you all to consider. The way that the governance team has really thought about this process is that the ideas that you decide to bring forward and elevate each year will continue to build out an archive of ideas. So the proposals don't evaporate, right? People can go back and click back in past years. And one thing that I think you have an opportunity to do in these public meetings and in reports to the governing board is to tell a story over time as well. So for example, there's a reason why in my ED update today, I wanted to highlight the governing board took action on adding the Scholarship Investment Board with the CalKids data for, a subset of data points. Haven't done the mapping to see exactly how that aligns with what you had proposed, Member Fung, but I think telling that story of saying, across time, here are ideas that were elevated. You're shaping a conversation, right? You're shaping a conversation at the state level about what kinds of information are most important, what really needs to be brought together. So I just wanted to mention that like in complement with what you're doing right now, which is being very focused and saying, what are the key things we want to elevate right now and really bring to the governing board and encourage action on? There's also an opportunity over time to say, hey, remember that thing that was elevated a year ago or 2 years ago, or eventually a longer time period? Here's how that now looks different in a new context. Or let's celebrate that some of that has moved, or let's highlight that nothing has moved, right? So just wanted to mention that as you think about, not necessarily the Springs report, but as you think about your reports in the future, what things you elevate, even, the pieces that you didn't vote on last fall can reemerge as a part of the story if you think that makes sense. So just a big picture reflection on process.
Thank you for that, and maybe I'll take the bait on one of the proposals. I think a lot of us are thinking a lot about the pipelines, right? I'm reading stories about PhD offers being rescinded at institutions that shall remain nameless for this conversation. But I think as we think about the long-term pipeline into various industries and into our educational systems, there is, to me right now, a very serious question about a different aspect of the brain drain. And so I think the graduate programs, especially by race, ethnicity, I think that's going to become a more and more critical thing for society to look at as we're thinking about just inclusion beyond education and in our workforce. So I know I'm termed off this board. Maybe some of you who aren't may hear from me over the course of the next year to put a little wind back behind the sails of this one. But for posterity, I would +1 to that.
And Member Faust, totally agree with you, Member Reddy. One of the things that personally I worry a little bit about with this with this proposal is just the potential for maybe the lack of context around why someone might choose to either like actively choose to go to a different university or change their major, or maybe it wasn't their fault, right? But kind of the lack of that contextual information, I would hate for that to be interpreted in a way that isn't accurate for individuals, right? So that would be my only clarification.
Member Fong, just really appreciative of the office for making this shift to do light touch feasibility studies, because I just remember walking away in October saying, gosh, there's so many things to include, and I can't believe we can only choose 3 to move forward, just knowing how much data is out there and how urgently our families and students need it. I think it's incredible that we're able to get the Cal Kids piece in there, because I remember in October we talked about it's actually too early days, like it's a pilot, and maybe it's too early to even capture that. So it is very exciting to see it included. And then to what you were saying, Member Faust, about all the context about what makes a student successful, the more we can capture some of the predictive things, key indicators that we've seen in research and best practices in these data points, not just like the milestone moments. I think those pieces are also going to be really helpful as well. Thank you.
Yeah, I think to that point, this is member Ortiz Villar, for your proposal, Member Fong, about the internships. I think that is like a perfect example of like the journey and not just like the milestone of the landing the job, the employment, or the salary amount that might already be in the works as we think about workforce data. But so I just want to plus one that I think some of that information I think is still really important. I think coming from the practitioner, like community-based organization, like a lot of us are talking about this information, and we don't have much data to like compare our results to. And so it would be really helpful to have like state data on how students are doing at the state level, and whether, how we're supporting students kind of supplemental to the college is working or not. So just want to highlight those data points from that feasibility study was super important for the work that we do in our space.
I see one of their online members has their hand raised.
Hi everyone, Member Reed. I just wanted to lend my support to that last comment. Also coming from a community organization that does college access work, Cradle-to-Career. This data is data on internships, workforce placement, completion of programs. That's data that's really difficult for us to gather self-report from our individual students, especially when we're serving a lot of them. So statewide data on that information is incredibly helpful for those of us who are trying to support students through the pipeline, especially internship, completion, first job data. Also thrilled to hear about the Cal Kids inclusion, but just wanted to lend my support to that.
Can I ask a clarifying question? So you said completion. Completion of what?
Oh, they said that one of the proposals was around degree completion, I believe. If I'm incorrect, please let me know. But I believe we were talking about which program students were completing from.
So that Okay, that information will be in the data set, because there's not only the completion data. So like if we're talking about community colleges, that could be a certificate or a degree or a 4-year degree or graduate degree. And then there'll be the federal codes that are used. They're called classification of instructional program codes. So that part is already slated for the database. What's important, Member Martinez-Lorenzo was explaining that there's a workforce task force that's rolling right now, and that's going to be adding additional information related to workforce training programs. So that doesn't speak to internships, nor does it speak to the issue of having the question of whether someone completed an individual career and technical education course while enrolled in college, but you could extrapolate for people who completed. So I just wanted to make sure that people were clear about what really was and wasn't there. So I'm going to go back to the issue of internship data and this idea of capturing maybe predictive elements that aren't the traditional milestones. So in my mind, this has a parallel to your earlier discussion about context. So you were saying earlier you wanted to understand how far people got based on the resources available to them. I'm hearing this as another wrinkle in that you want to make sure that you're going beyond maybe some of the traditional accountability type things, like straight up completion, and more looking at course rates, skills, and extracurriculars like internships. Do I have that right as something that you're hoping that the data system will address in the future? Okay.
But also, so Member Faust, just keeping in mind though that as like a very concrete example, when I'm thinking about context around the data, I wouldn't want it to be a knock on let's say a university that a graduate student decided to go to a different school that was a better fit, right? Maybe it was the coursework that inspired, right? That change, right? So it's just, for me, it's more about making sure that we're not creating accountability around things that may not be the best for students, right? And we just need to know a little bit more about what the circumstances, opportunities for those students, and that involves context.
Vikash Reddy. I sort of feel like actually the context is up to the person who looks at the data and says, why are they all leaving that school, right? And that the system here is to say, here are the number of students of this race, ethnicity going into that graduate program. Here are the number coming out with degrees. Researchers go, right? Like, I think actually it's not up to this organization, and maybe it's a commission question, right? But to set context or find context, I think I would urge us to be a lot more about the data.
Oliver Shack, just going off of that, I definitely agree with that sentiment generally. And full disclosure was my proposal through the last round. But just more of a clarification, that is it correct that we basically have the data to calculate graduate school graduation rates, and the only question is what is like a productive metric to use, and how is it kind of like displayed in a dashboard? But we have the data. Is that right?
Yes, but it's more complicated than that. So when we engaged in sort of the light touch feasibility studies, one of the things we tried to highlight is the ways that this information could potentially be difficult to make determinations about. So graduating in the context of graduate school could mean a lot of different things. And all we know about a student is that they were admitted as a graduate student. So there are a number of different outcomes in which a student could potentially do all the things ranging from they earn a post-bac to they complete a doctoral program, or they obtain a master's degree. So we don't necessarily have all the information to look at how many were admitted into the specific track and program and how many came out in the specific track and program.
Gotcha. So just for clarity, we don't have information to kind of construct cohorts like the undergraduate graduation rate. So that would require some additional work.
Yes.
All right. I think we're close to the end of our time. Is there any final comments that you want to just make sure that we note down to help prepare that report for the board? All right. Well, thank you so much.
Great. Thank you all. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, David. We will now pause for a 5-minute break, and we ask that you return promptly at 2:30. I'll give you 39. Thank you. All right. Welcome back. We're moving on to agenda item 11, discussion of the 2025 advisory board proposal process, including a review of the draft proposal form and rubric. I would like to invite Stephanie Gutierrez Valdez, board liaison and governance specialist, and Ryan Estriado, director of data programs, to present this agenda item.
Good afternoon, everyone. Well, we're in the home stretch, so we'll try our best to keep this brief. For this agenda item, I'd like to refer members to the staff report that was created. If you are a member of the public and would like to follow along, the staff report can be accessed on the C2C website. So joining me for this presentation is Ryan Estriado, Director of Data Programs. So we'll begin this presentation with an overview of the advisory board recommendation process, highlighting key dates, the overall timeline, and the role of the member in the process. Ryan will conclude today's presentation by providing some background information, an overview of the 2025 proposal form and rubric, and highlighting some related resources for advisory board members and the public. Next slide, please. So, as established through Education Code Section 10865B1A, it's a mouthful, the Data and Tools Advisory Board is responsible for providing input and feedback to the governing board about whether the data system is providing actionable information and identifying ways to improve access to that information. So, as outlined in the governance manual, when there are significant gaps regarding whether the data system is providing access to actionable information, the Data and Tools Advisory Board may develop recommendation for the governing board on which tools to provide or which data points to include in centralized data sets. So the Data and Tools Advisory Board can address a significant gap via a proposal process by recommending changes to the data request process, changes to tools such as dashboards or practical tools, or additional data points to the P20W data system. So earlier today, we introduced the Advisory Board recommendation process graphic displayed here in front of us. And we discussed the revisions made to the Advisory Board recommendation process. So to assist members in following along, members will have received a printout of said reference graphic in front of them. We're now going to revisit this process, but this focus is going to be more specific towards deadlines and responsibilities. In addition, members will have also received a printout of Attachment A of the staff report, seen here, titled Data and Tools Proposal Process Member Responsibility, which outlines key member responsibilities and milestones in this year's recommendation process. So the intent behind this presentation is to ensure that advisory board members and the public can prepare for key due dates and milestones in this upcoming process. So before we move forward to subsequent slides, I'd like to highlight the color coding system being utilized. First, the blue, which is an indication of Data and Tools Advisory Board meetings. The green, that means a milestone. And purple, which relates to member deadlines. Next slide, please. So, we're here in March. Beginning today at our March 19th, 2025 Data and Tools Advisory Board meeting, members are going to have an opportunity to review and discuss the 2025 proposal form and rubric. The proposal form as it is defined today will be made publicly available on the C2C website beginning tomorrow, Thursday, March 20th. So at that time, members of the public or Community Engagement Advisory Board members may utilize the Data and Tools proposal form to submit their ideas. So we strongly encourage members of the public, including our Community Engagement Advisory Board members, to review the posted proposal forms once they go live. Next slide. Moving on to May. So as specified in the governance manual, all proposal forms from the public must be submitted to the office no later than May 1st of each year. And this is just to ensure that there's a consistent deadline each year that members of the public and opposing advisory boards can keep in mind and consider as they're working throughout the year to kind of identify key proposals they wish to submit. So I want to emphasize here that there are no exceptions to the May 1st deadline. Proposal forms from the public will be reviewed by the office and added to the C2C website for global viewing by Thursday, May 8th, so about a week. So I just want to highlight here that the office does retain the authority to screen out spam or inappropriate submissions as needed. Next slide. July 2025. So the Summer Joint Advisory Board meeting is scheduled for Friday, July 11th, as we can see on that in that blue square. So just as a reminder for members of the advisory board and the public, the agenda and corresponding materials should be posted to the C2C website at least 2 weeks prior to that meeting. So as members prepare for the July 11th meeting, members should, 1, review the proposal form submitted by the public, 2, be prepared to publicly discuss the public proposal forms received, and 3, draft questions related to the P20W dataset. I'd highly recommend that all members schedule a briefing with the office in preparation for this meeting. Next slide. Now we're in August. So if a member would wish to submit a proposal, they must do so no later than Friday, August 22nd. So just as a friendly reminder, members may choose to submit their own proposal form. They may choose to sponsor a proposal form that was received over the summer by a member of the public. They may choose to further refine concepts from a form that was submitted, or they may choose to submit a joint proposal with up to 5 of your fellow Data and Tools Advisory Board members. So members who submit a proposal form or forms may recommend adding 1 data point or several clearly related data points to the data system. Forms may also be submitted for changes to tools or the data request process. September. The office will post all proposal forms submitted by Data and Tools Advisory Board members to the C2C website on Friday, September 19th. All members who submit a proposal will have an opportunity to meet with the office for a pre-meeting briefing between September 19th to September 25th prior to the fall meeting proposal presentations. Next slide. October. So in preparation for the Fall Data and Tools Advisory Board meeting on Friday, October 3rd, members are expected to review all member proposals utilizing the proposal rubric as included in attachment C of the staff report to examine potential impact and alignment with the C2C vision, mission, and an authority. As members prepare for the October 3rd meeting, please consider requesting a briefing with the office. At the Fall Data and Tools Advisory Board meeting, all members who submitted a proposal will have an opportunity to present their ideas to your fellow Data and Tools Advisory Board members. So just a helpful note, presentation time for each proposal will be divided based on the number of proposals submitted, just to ensure that all advisory board members are able to, 1, present their proposals and have all proposals heard. Members will have the opportunity to discuss the ideas presented, and this will include how different proposals may complement or contrast, and they may also elevate which proposals they find more promising to advance C2C's ability to provide actionable information. In addition, I just want to highlight that the governing board liaisons to the Data and Tools Advisory Board will be in attendance at this meeting to learn from that discussion. At the fall meeting, the office will be asking 2 Data and Tools Advisory Board members to volunteer to work with the governing board liaison to the Data and Tools Advisory Board to draft the advisory board proposals report. Next slide. Okay, so after the fall meeting leading up to spring 2026, there's several key milestones that will take place. So let's start with the office. After the fall meeting, office staff will conduct a light touch feasibility study of all proposals, which will cover topics including legal requirements, startup and ongoing costs, potential approaches for collecting the information, and any political or other implications that would jeopardize the neutrality of the office. So as for our proposal authors, you will have an opportunity to review the office's light touch feasibility analysis and may choose to update or clarify your ideas based on the feasibility analysis. Okay, so for our 2 volunteers, you will work offline with the governing board liaison to the Data and Tools Advisory Board to draft the Data and Tools Advisory Board proposal report. So notably, this report will include 3 distinct sections. 1, a link to all proposals discussed and presented at the fall meeting. 2, all of the office's light touch feasibility analysis. And finally, it will include a specific section dedicated to a summarization of the discussion of the fall meeting. So please note, while the office can offer some assistance with the report, I really want to emphasize to the Data and Tools Advisory Board members that the Data and Tools Advisory Board is responsible for drafting the complete report. So now we're at the Spring 2026 Data and Tools Advisory Board meeting. Please note the office is finalizing dates and hopes to present them at the upcoming July 11th Advisory Board meeting. Members will have an opportunity to review, discuss, and reflect on the draft report. So the Data and Tools Advisory Board may choose to update the report based on the discussions at the spring meeting. In addition, our 2 Data and Tools Advisory Board members who volunteered to draft the report, in addition to the Governing Board liaison to the Data and Tools Advisory Board, will present the report to the Governing Board at the May 2026 Governing Board meeting. So again, just want to emphasize that the report may be used to inform the Governing Board's work and deliberations, and that for any additional data points to the P20W data system where the Governing Board would like to take action, the Governing Board may ask the office to resolve any open feasibility questions with the data provider and work on file upload specification in preparation for formal board action at future Governing Board meetings. At this time, I would like to hand it over to Ryan Estrellado to complete this presentation.
Thank you, Stephanie. The Education Code gives us guidance about the role of the Data and Tools Advisory Board, which is to advise the Governing Board about the data system, and in particular, exploring whether the system offers actionable information that is accessible to the public. Next slide, please. In general, that advice takes 3 forms as described in the governance manual. First, potential changes to the data request process. Second, potential changes to tools such as dashboards or operational tools for students. And then finally, adding data points not available through the P20W data set or adjusting existing P20W data points. So how does an idea turn into advice for the Governing Board? That journey starts with the proposal process. Data and Tools Advisory Board members can submit their own proposals, or they can also sponsor one submitted by a member of the public. 2 weeks before the fall Data and Tools Advisory Board meeting, the office will post all proposals on the Cradle-to-Career website. You will have 2 forms to support this process. One is the proposal form itself. You're all familiar with that one. The other is one you are also familiar with, which is the rubric. And now with this new process, this rubric will serve the function of giving you a sense of what to shoot for in your proposals so that you can be thoughtful about how you want to convey your ideas. After the proposals are submitted, the office works on the light touch feasibility studies. In the previous procedure, the office conducted in-depth feasibility studies on up to 3 proposals that the advisory board voted on in the fall. And as we've discussed in the previous agenda items, in this new procedure, the office will conduct light touch feasibility studies on all of the proposals. And these light touch feasibility studies will answer questions like the one we see here on the slide. First, do requested data points already exist in the system? Second, if they do not, can they be derived from existing data points? And then finally, if they do not exist in the system, how might we define the requested data points? And then the last thing is that, as in previous years, there are more proposal resources for you to explore in support of your process of developing proposals. And I'll highlight the following. First is the adding data points section of the governance manual. So if you go into the governance manual, search for adding data points, that section. Next is a section of our website that gives an overview of the proposal process. There, you'll also find a repository of past proposals that you can use for reference. The next one is our website's description of planned dashboards so that you can anchor your proposals to specific C2C use cases. The fifth is the data point section of our website, which gives you a list of current and planned data points. And then finally, I'll highlight that you'll be attending a meeting again this year with your community engagement advisory board counterparts, where you'll have the chance to chat with the data providers and staff about data points and data tools. And that will conclude this agenda item. I'd like to hand the mic back to Shannon Serrato. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ryan, and thank you to Stephanie and you again, Ryan, for that informative presentation. Before we move on to the next item of our agenda, I would like to open up the floor to any member questions or comments, and I invite you all to share your thoughts. Okay, just one second. We're seeking clarification. One moment.
This is Marianne. I just wanted to share one reflection, and my staff can correct me if I'm remembering this detail incorrectly, but as it's like the end of the day and you just absorbed a ton of information that Ryan shared on the new process. One thing that I think is conceptually different moving forward in the new process than what has been in the past is how you think about how many proposals you each submit. So in the old state of the world, where you were going to limit it to just 3, we said, okay, if you want to submit multiple proposals, you can, but only 3 are going to merge from this body. So you can sort of calculate, do you want to put all your eggs in one basket or submit more than one? I just want to state something that I think we all know, but every hour that, Dr. Lang spends on doing feasibility studies is an hour he is not spending developing the research request process for you, developing a new data visualization. So we've got to think about those trade-offs. So as you think about moving forward, because we don't have that 3 proposal constraint, we can't do light touch feasibility studies for 47 ideas. So moving forward, you'll really need to think about like, what one idea are you going to put your name to? Could be your own, it could be one you do in collaboration with others, it could be something that came from the public. But I just wanted to emphasize that point because we have had, some of you have submitted more than one idea in past years, which was fine. And I was just asking, is this really clear in the governance manual and the language on that? But I think conceptually moving forward, really thinking about each of you as a member, putting forward one idea is a difference that exists and is different from what you've experienced in the past. So I just wanted to elevate that a little bit as you think about the new process. And there's always a trade-off in terms of how many ideas we bring forward and kind of the how much emphasis each idea then gets. So just a parting process reflection from my end.
This is Member Catanzarite. Just a point of clarification. The limit to 1 proposal per member, if we were to ally and put 5 of us together and submit out of all of us like 3 proposals, is that the one shot?
This group is so amazing. We support the governing board and their committee and updating the governance manual, and we think we've thought through all of the contingencies. This might be something where I might ask our board chair for clarification before you kick off the process, because I think what I'm hearing you ask is, say that you and the people sitting to your left and right decide to go together and create one combined proposal, then you're asking, well, could we have 3 combined proposals then? Each of you, I guess, would put your name on just one of those. I think This sounds like something that'd be helpful for us to clarify. I think this week, in looking at our legal counsel here, we'll seek for some office administrative clarification, maybe in partnership with our board chair, to make sure you're really clear before your proposal deadline on what you can do. I think what I wanted to clarify and elevate is just, please don't bring 47 ideas in the fall and ask for 47 light touch feasibility studies. That will have a real impact on our ability to do the broader work. So we will seek to clarify this operationally before your proposal due dates. Is that helpful? Okay.
Can I expand on that, Marianne? Unfortunately, the website's loading a bit slower than usual, so I can't quite pull up the exact language to quote the governance manual verbatim. But I do want to specify, in response to multiple proposals being submitted by an individual member, what the language in the governance manual does specify, and as I elevated during my presentation, is that the presentation time will be limited or divided basically depending on the amount of proposals being submitted. So if we receive, let's say hypothetically, 30 plus proposals, the presentation time dedicated to discussing those 30 proposals will be similar to the presentation time dedicated to, let's say, discussing and elevating 10 proposals. So it's also a trade-off on behalf of members to understand how much in-depth and collaborative discussion do we want to focus in on? Would we rather focus in on discussing various proposals, or do we really want to fine-tune the specifics on high quality, even if it's like 5 or 6 proposals? So just something to consider going forward.
This is Member Ortiz Villar. I think that question to me, I'm still grappling with like, what is the governing board gonna do when this is elevated to them? And if it's, 47 proposals get submitted and they discuss those 47 proposals and 30 of them are actually a go, like that seems really productive and like really exciting. But if it's only 3 and then nothing's a go, like that feels like we just wasted a cycle. Maybe I'm thinking about it like not correctly, and please correct me if I'm wrong. But yeah, just wondering, like, I think having clarification on what the governing board's intent beyond just discussing would help in deciding what the ideas could potentially be. And I don't know if other folks have like similar, maybe anxieties around that.
Yeah, this is Marianne, just a reflection on your comment. I think the new process puts the onus on the governing board members to integrate ideas that they hear from you through recommendations, through, from public comment they get in their meetings, from their broader work, right? It puts the onus on the governing board to integrate ideas into their work as a governing board, full stop, and specifically into the review of our work plan and budget requests. So I think that's kind of the big picture context.
Member Fong, I just had a question, clarification question. So when the public submits their proposals, the only way that'll be discussed is still if a member sponsors that proposal, correct?
That's correct. That's a mechanism for the public to send ideas to you. And then it's your choice whether you want to further elevate those. They're all posted on our website. So people can see, again, a growing archive of ideas that came in from the public. And then that's like a resource that you can tap into if you would like to. But for that one, the onus is really on you as a body to decide whether or not you want to elevate and lift up ideas that come in from the public.
And just off the top of your head, do you just happen to remember in the last few cycles how many public submissions there were?
I won't give a number off the top of my head, but it's on our website, so you can see that unless you know. But yeah, it was a modest number. We didn't get dozens.
Okay.
The specific number is 0 for Community Engagement Advisory Board, 6 for Data and Tools Advisory Board. One of those 6 was actually moved forward and sponsored by Member Owen in the last 2024 Advisory Board recommendation cycle. And as Marianne mentioned, they are listed on our proposal archive on the C2C website.
Good. I'm just trying to like calibrate to make sure they're not submitting 47 proposals too. So that's great.
Member Shack speaking. I'm just still thinking about the question about the number of proposals. I don't really have an answer specifically about that, but I think one input I would have is I think that summer meeting. So the next meeting might be more important than I initially thought, because it might be an opportunity for some communication about, what are the proposals people are interested in? How can you consolidate them down before going into that fall? Because outside of that meeting, it's hard for me to see that kind of, especially with, Bagley Keenan and all that, that sort of coordination happening.
I would also just like to offer a reflection as somebody who is totally removed from the data side of the house. So please take this with a grain of salt. We still read those proposals, and those proposals live on the site, and they still live on with us. And so I want to give an example from a Community Engagement Advisory Board member, Member Nguyen, who proposed a mobile application for the C2C website. That was going to be a high cost, very time intensive process, but we know the importance of making sure that the website and all of the data stories are mobile friendly. And so that's something that we incorporated into the design of our website and into the data story itself. And so I just want to note that while this proposal maybe didn't see its full, potential and do all the things that Member Nguyen had hoped, he still impacted the work of the office. And we still took that into consideration as we think about what will matter to students and how we can best serve those folks. And so I just want to offer that as somebody who hears and listens, and maybe I'm not in the weeds all the time, but we do carry out to our best of abilities the work of, what you are doing and the spirit of what you're trying to achieve. So just want to offer that because I understand that writing a proposal and having these meetings is time intensive and it's a lot of work. But it doesn't just die because it didn't move forward. So just want to note that.
Sorry, Member Fong again. I remember from the last meeting you were talking about prioritizing like workforce and training data points. Is there any more that we can like learn from you about any of the data points so that way we know we're not submitting proposals that might overlap with what you're already doing?
Yes, that's exactly what the task force we're halfway through right now is doing. We do expect that there will be a report out from that task force prior to the May governing board meeting. And so you should be able, the timing for this should work fairly well, and that the kind of final list of what the labor and workforce development agencies departments are able to share should be fairly baked by the May meeting, enough so that that can inform what proposals you may decide to elevate. That's a great question, but the timing should work out fairly nicely for this round. Yeah.
All right, any other questions or comments? Okay, thank you all. We will move on to agenda item 12. So this section is reserved for general public comment. At this time, we will open it up again to members of the public for general public comments. Stephanie Gutierrez Valdez, do we have anyone who would like to make a comment?
There are no commenters here in Sacramento. Let's move to Zoom. For members of the public attending via Zoom, please raise your hand at this time if you would like to comment. Okay, at this time, I see no raised hands and I will close general public comment.
Thank you, Stephanie. All right, we will now move on to agenda item 13, future agenda items. During this agenda item, we will open it up to members, followed by members of the public. At this time, folks can request items that they would like to see as future agenda items. So members, let's start with you. Is there anything that you would like to see in future meetings, future agendas? Okay. We will turn it over to the public. Stephanie, do we have anyone who wishes to make a comment from the public?
Okay. Noting that there are no commenters here in Sacramento, moving over to Zoom. For anyone attending via Zoom, please raise your hand at this time if you would like to comment. Okay, at this time, I see no raised hands and I will close public comment.
All right, we will move on to our final agenda item of the day, adjournment. So thank you to everyone who joined us today, specifically our Data and Tools Advisory Board members, the entire C2C team, and the public for your invaluable input and support provided today. Our achievements are the result of collective collaboration, and your ongoing support has been invaluable to our success. Our next public meeting will be our Community Engagement Advisory Board meeting next Wednesday, March 26th. That meeting will be a hybrid meeting with a physical location in Sacramento, and we ask that all members join us in person. Members of the public will have an opportunity to join these meetings in person or virtually via Zoom. As highlighted earlier today, the Selection for Advisory Boards Committee is scheduled for Wednesday, April 16th from noon to 2 p.m. And the Governing Board meeting is scheduled for May 9th, 2025, beginning at 9:30 a.m. In addition, our Data and Tools and Community Engagement Advisory Board joint meeting is scheduled for Friday, July 11th, beginning at 10 a.m. More information will be forthcoming on the C2C website. And with that, thank you all. I would like to adjourn this meeting at 3:12 p.m.